Good evening, everyone. Time is now 6 p.m. I'm going to call our meeting to order. This is just a special council meeting for December the 14th. We are here primarily for strategic priorities. As we call the meeting to order, I just want to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territories of the Coast and Straits Salish peoples, specifically the Lekwungen people, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and honoring that their connections to these lands and waters continues to this day. Up first, we have approval of the agenda. Can I have a mover and seconder? Thank you. Is there any discussion changes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. We move to mayor's remarks. Very, very short. I just need to give notice. We had one of the items, 8.4, in the agenda on Monday, which we voted no in two directions, which gives no ability to this is a 6-month lag, so there's only 6 of us here. So I'm going to just give a notice of reconsideration. It'll come back to a future meeting when all 7 of us are here. We can have that discussion. But I have to do it within 30 days, hence my comment now. And my only other comment, it's the last meeting of the year. So with that, I just want to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas, holiday, but also just thank members of council and staff. It's been both sort of a fun and challenging year simultaneously, which is the nature of this business. We have some staff that have celebrated milestones and some very long milestones. We had a long service award this year. One of ours was over 40 years of employment with our municipality, which is quite remarkable. And we have some people here. It's our second meeting for our new director of corporate services. So looking forward to 2024 with all of you. That's totally all of my comments for tonight, and just want to move on to the items. We had a very long night on Monday, and I want to make sure that we're thorough but expeditious this evening. So on to section 4. All of these are subject to public input. So I'm just going to ask, as we announce each item, if anybody wishes to speak that's online, if you could just either within the Zoom app raise your hand using the reactions tab, or if you're calling into the 1855 number, just hit *9, that is *9, not #9, to raise your hand within the app, and then we'll go to you at the time that we have the public input portion. Generally speaking, we take questions, public comment, and then we get to debate with the motion on the floor after that. So the first item up here is council appointments to external agencies and boards. I'm just going to ask, is anybody here wanting to speak to our external appointments? See anybody? I didn't expect to.
Receipt.
So we have a motion that the report be received, seconded. Thank you. There was just one change in which we swapped Councillor Watson and Smart on heritage, just due to a bit of a timing conflict with work for Councillor Smart. Has that change been updated in the agenda? Is that it has? Good. Just wanted to confirm. So with that updated version, it's here. Is someone wish to move the recommendations? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? I'll just say thank you very much for all your service. We do these updates. You probably hear them, Committee of the Whole, where people update some of the work they do on some of these committees. But if you look at the list, it's very extensive, and there's a lot of time. It's just extra time that comes with the job at a lot of these external agencies. So thank you very much, everybody, for all that work. That being said, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. We move to provincial. It's okay. It happens all the time. Whenever you start up a new opening, it always defaults to the microphone on. We'll move here to the 4.2 Provincial Housing Directives. Mr. Bull, I think you are up to provide an overview. This was a subject of some discussion last time as we were trying to struggle with the impacts of different options around the provincial housing orders and new legislation. So I'll hand it over to you to provide an overview.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and apologies for the late arrival. I'll pull up a short presentation to show you a couple of things. All right, there we go. Thanks for your patience. We followed up on the council discussion on November 27th. This is a recap of the decisions of that day. Growing Communities Fund was assigned to the newly provincially directed housing projects, and a portion of previously assigned Growing Communities Fund was redirected. And there was also direction from Council to prioritize 3 housing initiatives over the coming 10 months. The policies and changing the zoning to allow for infill housing in alignment with the provincial zoning changes. And attached to the report, attachment 2 and 3 provide further details. And this is a portion of that attachment 2 showing the timelines. And I'm going to use that to point out a couple of things around timelines. And there's a lot of timelines involved here, both a number of things that resulted in prioritization, but also related to the province. It's a bit hard to see, and the letters are clearly small, but the top 3 projects are the prioritized projects. The first one is zoning bylaw updates, the second one is the OCP one, and the third one in purple is the amenity cost charges and development cost charges project. And you can see on the right-hand side, it shows quarters in different years, and there's black target symbols, so to say. Those are provincial timelines that are mandated in the sense that the one at the top, let me see if I can point at that here. Oh yeah, so that's for the introduction of the zoning changes for the small-scale multi-unit housing program. And then the further down below, there is housing needs report is the next one from the province. There's a whole series of them here. In this row, that's the tracking program and the reporting that the province requires on the housing target order. And finally, over here, there's 2 that relate to each other. That's for a larger OCP review and a zoning bylaw update. And that ties into the housing needs report and the changes to policy that are required for that need to be implemented by the end of 2025. Now, on top of that, or in addition to that, we also have identified our own timelines, but tentatively. Those are the green ones. And what's probably notable here is the third line again, the third purple line is about the amenity cost charges and the development cost charges programs. We think the ACC program can be completed a little bit faster because it doesn't require ministerial approval. The DCC program is a bit of a harder one. It does require provincial approval, and it's also, for us, it's going to be the first DCC program. So we start a little bit, we have a different starting point than other municipalities. I simply update their program. We just kind of start from scratch and find a way creatively and with some innovation to put it in place relatively fast where we can. And there may be categories of DCCs that will wait for the future. But that's why there is a bit of a conservative timeline there that might take up to a year. It might be faster, but because of the unknowns, we can't really commit to that at this point. Oh, there's also a number of eyes that you can see in the attachment, and I hope on your screens it's a bit more clear. But there's still some information coming from the province later, particularly for the OCP changes and the zoning changes that are required by the end of next year. We just received last week the details on the small-scale multi-unit program. So that's a policy manual of about 100 pages that we're studying and exploring to try to establish how does it get implemented and what are the remaining elements that we can detail. So yeah, I wanted to show this to you tonight to highlight that there's different deadlines overlapping with each other, and it's a bit the same complexity we were talking about at our previous meetings. So in that light, we wanted to circle back to the direction that we did get from you in on November 27th. So there are many provincial milestones. The DCC program does require provincial approval, which is out of our control. And we need to prioritize the project that you have selected, and we will work towards that, and it's possible, but it's still based on limited information. So what exactly we can produce by what time is a little bit tentative. So for that reason, we would like to seek your endorsement or approval to pursue the timelines that are recorded and reflected in that attachment number 2. which I just showed you a portion of. There's a bit more information in the report itself. So that's the one ask that we have for you tonight. And then with regards to the village area planning, we also gave an update on that for the report, incorporating some other comments that we received after we finished the report that was in front of you November 27th. And also did some more thinking about how these different things work together. I'm going to backtrack 2 slides here. It's a bit too small to see, but there's a number of key assessments. I think we were talking about it in a previous meeting as well. There's going to be an analysis about the viability of land development. That's a very important one to establish how much uptake we might expect, and that will inform our further decisions. A commercial and a retail analysis, and also an infrastructure and community facilities analysis. Those support the purple projects, which are part of the housing portfolio, but they also support future village area planning. And in a way, it starts the land use portion of village area, but through the housing lens. That's all happening in 2024, 2025. Down below, the village area planning in earnest. In the report, we have captured the scope and some of the elements that council members have identified as missing from the housing portion of this work. And we grouped that, and we intend that to be the scope of the village areas planning process, and it will focus on the 3 areas that have been tentatively identified: Oak Bay Village, Cadborough Bay Village, and Estevan Village. But that work will only get underway fully in 2026 and on. But that project and process should be comprehensive and get into much more detail about other, beyond land use, other details for the village areas. So with that, that's an introduction and a short overview of our report, and we recommend to receive the report, and we also recommend that in consideration of the full scope, to meet all the different deadlines, that council approve the projected timelines from attachment 2 as attached in the report, and that's an update and a clarification on the November 27th direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To have the graphics to understand where those are laying out. Are there questions from Mr. Bull, from members of council? Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Bull. This is so helpful and I think a very reasonable ask. I just had 2 questions. One of them was just noting that the village planning attachment number 3 was done on a yearly basis. Is it possible still to receive quarterly updates with our council priorities on just how the other projects, the provincial projects, might be relating to the village planning, so we can still have a council touch point more frequently than a year around the progress towards anything related to village planning?
Mr. Bull?
Oh, through you, Mayor. We do intend to provide updates, and we can definitely reflect on the items that are relevant for the village area planning in the future as well. I'm not sure if we report quarterly on projects. I thought it was twice a year, but Ms. Bay might be able to clarify that.
Welcome, Ms. Bay.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, we report generally at the end of Q2 and the end of Q4, so we could include updates on that through that process. There might be the opportunity for other updates through some of the related projects if those are coming through to council to provide information as part of that, and there may also be opportunities through the council resolution updates that happen on a quarterly basis through the CAO's office.
Anything else, Councillor Smart?
Thank you. Just one other clarification through you, Mayor, to Mr. Bull. Just excited to see the development of this project, and I just wanted to clarify item number 75 when it talks about complete communities and that kind of more urban design piece. Is there an opportunity to do within that, like that sort of 15-minute city analysis around those other village centers? I'm thinking it's implied by the wording, but I just wanted to understand, so as we see projects potentially coming forward, we can have an early glimpse at where we might be accepting new areas for non-residential use.
Bull?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. That's indeed the intent, to take that wider look and look at the village areas as well. Thank you.
Councillor Green and then Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Through you, is it through you tonight, or are we less formal? Still through you. Through you to Mr. Bull. Mr. Bull, thank you very much for all of this. I'm just wondering if the village plan, further to Councillor Smart's comments, can the village planning process, can it integrate some of the housing target work that is required by the province? In other words, are these all mutually exclusive? Could we look at the village planning process as, more inclusive and holistic, so that we could roll some of the provincial housing issues or planning issues into a village planning process? I guess that's my question. I feel badly that the village planning process has been moved out to 2026 to begin. I actually think that I'm just feeling that maybe housing doesn't have to cancel the village planning process entirely, that we could somehow integrate them. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Bull.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Yeah, in a way, it's a little bit the other way around. We're rolling some of the village area work into the housing projects, because housing is kind of directed by the province to be taken care of first. So that's where some of the land use analysis that we have in mind for the coming year, it goes beyond the initial, the small scale multi-unit program. We want to take the wider look at land use. That's why there's a commercial and retail analysis scheduled and soon to start actually. And so what we're trying to do there is make sure that the land use questions for the village areas are looked at in the context of the housing changes, because they're so substantial that it begs the question, well, there's one program for single family areas that need to be implemented right away, but what does it mean for multifamily areas, mixed use areas, and is there a need to consider future growth of those land uses as well? So that's how we do. I think we are going to be taking care of that part of the village area planning, but it will be involved into the housing projects rather than the other way around, although it's probably any way you could look at it, but that's the process. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Just one follow-up. Thank you, through you. Thank you, Mr. Bull. Just a question. If we could expedite the village planning process by hiring a consultant, for instance, do we have that financial capacity in your opinion? And I don't mean to make it a financial question, but is that possible in order to expedite the planning for village planning and bring it forward to an earlier start date? Thank you.
Mr. Bull.
Through you, Mayor, that would be it would require significant effort. Right now, the current planned work and the current organization, and it includes and we do anticipate that next year we'll have to scale up and get extra resources to deal with the housing projects. Right now, in that context, we don't have a clear avenue to also expedite the village area planning. It would require much more substantial other additional resources. I think Ms. Bay's report talks about project management options. So it's in that realm that then the district would need to consider setting up an additional team likely to make sure that is properly handled and properly resourced. So it's not impossible, but it requires tremendous effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Watson, Braithwaite, Patterson, and then Appleton.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to Mr. Bull. I've been quite amazed at how much work you've had to do already just to keep track of the requirements coming in from the province. And I did just have a chance today to look very briefly at the policy manual that's come out to support Bill 44, now in force. And I just wanted to understand how the land capacity analysis that you've identified in Project 72 as item 4, if you can comment on this already, because I'm sure you've looked at the policy guidance, how does it compare with the guidance given in the appendices C, D, and E of that policy manual, which are about identifying lots that are subject to the legislation and calculating the maximum build out? Is that the kind of methodology were talking about when, for item number 4, is it really stuff that you have to do? Well, they've given this sort of framework for how you would do it in the guidance. Or if you could just comment on that, please.
Mr. Bull?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. I'm not fully aware of the appendices yet. Well, I've noted they are there. I'm wondering if Ms. Ramel has any insight on this. And you're also probably more familiar with the approach that the firm is proposing to take on this one, right?
Welcome, Ms. Ramel.
Good evening. Thank you. Through your worship. Yes, so the consultant that we're in the process of securing was supporting the development of this policy guidebook. So they are very familiar with it, and we're fortunate to have that level of expertise on board. So also as part of that scope to respond to the council motion, we'll also be looking at sites that would be looked at for higher residential multifamily unit to respond to that direction. So we'll see what would come through the SMU, as well as what potential sites might come forward for the commercial kind of village area boundaries, and taking all that into consideration.
Great, thank you. That was just what I was trying to understand. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm going to ask that we call it SSMU or something, or SSU, double SUM. Yeah, it's just because we have our the school locally here, which is St. Mike's, which is always referred to as SMU. So it gets confusing to the public, I think, if we use that acronym. Although it's used universally, I think, everywhere except for here. I have next Councillor Braithwaite, then Patterson.
Thanks so much, and through you, Mayor. Yeah, to kind of go along with what some of the comments that Councillor Green was making in regards to the timeline for the village area plan. It would be interesting to see how that could be integrated a little bit earlier into the system, if possible. But I do have a question around the DDC. As you mentioned that there's no program yet for the DDC, but so we would be starting from scratch. But is it something that we could look at a similar municipality as ours and be able to kind of copy what they have done or learn from what they have done to help us, so that we're not actually starting really from scratch?
Mr. Bull, I might add to that. We did, when we were developing direction on developing DCCs and community amenity charge models, that we had a consultant come and do a bunch of background for this. I'm just also curious about how much that plays into the foundational work that we can bring forward.
Yeah, thank you. And for you, Mayor. Yeah, there's definitely resources available that way. There's also a very detailed best practices guide that municipalities are supposed to follow. We are aware of the previous explorations for a DC program that the district did investigate. There's also condition assessments that we have recently done for water, roads, sanitary and storm infrastructure. That's going to be helpful, even though they were not specifically looking at growth necessarily. So we think there's definitely information we're going to be relying on. The land analysis we were just talking about should inform us a bit about the expected level of growth. And those things combined, there's a translation that needs to take place to then come up with basically a list of projects for infrastructure improvements and related to the growth. And there's a fairly prescribed process for that. Yeah, so the reason I was a bit cautious about it is taking the traditional approach will take longer, but we're going to be relying on that information I was just mentioning that's readily available. But we have to figure out how we can navigate that best and come up with a proposal that the province will sign off on, and that's where we're a little bit cautious as staff. We want to make sure that we see the program ourselves and are confident with bringing it forward to you first, and the consultation also needs to take place with the development industry and then to the province. So that's the reason why we're a bit cautious, because it is a bit of a more unusual path to follow to create a program. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. And in the report, it talked under the analysis section, it talked about number 74, the interim housing needs report. So I'm assuming that we can use the report that we have just completed, or do we have to augment that hugely in a way? Or I guess that's my question. Do we have to augment it?
Mr. Bull?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. It is required to be updated. The province has identified or indicated that they would like to have a standardized approach followed. The other difference is the term. So instead of 5 years, it's supposed to be a 20-year term. Those are some key changes that will warrant an update to that report. Thank you.
Thank you. And then my last question for now is, and I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time to ask this question, but I know that I heard on a news report the other day that Salish is looking at having to hire 32 new people to be able to carry out the mandate from the province for their district. And they're saying they don't have space for 32 people in their facility. They don't have computer equipment and other equipment for their people, and they don't have the dollars to pay for it. Which I thought, well, if they need 32 people, we probably need at least a third of that. So I'm wondering if we have any idea of how many people we need, and if we have thoughts as far ahead of as where we're going to place these people that we may have to hire, and where the money's going to come from.
Lots of good questions there, Mr. Bull.
After you, Mayor. Those are big questions. Yeah, definitely see an increase in development applications down the road, and that will affect staffing levels. There's also systems and processes to be updated, so it's not a clear, simple, straightforward extrapolation. And the other unknown is really the uptake in projects. Are the conditions in Oak Bay or in the region, for that matter, conducive to see a lot of uptake, or is it actually, for different reasons, not that much? There's a lot of unknowns there, and of course our offices are limited in space. We're already running into limits, but I can't really. I'm not sure if there's much more to say there, except that maybe Ms. Williams can jump in, but I think that has been looked at and continues to be looked at, but that's also something to be determined in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I turn to Councillor Patterson, then Appleton. You don't have a microphone. No, I'm sorry, that's it. You can't talk. That's just the way it is. Thank you, Riley.
Thank you. I thought it was going to be a very brief meeting for me. Oh, just to follow up still on the DCCs. I'm just wondering, under the new mandate, is it? Are you still limited to the minimum number of dwellings that have to be in an application before the DCCs kick in, or because it used to be like 4?
Mr. Green, welcome.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. No, there wouldn't be a limit. Obviously, you can set certain waivers within that programme in relation to affordable housing, for example, but there's no, it would apply to have a subdivision for single-family dwellings or at building permit stage for multi-unit, but there is no threshold that, so down to a single dwelling would pay that DCC if it was an additional net dwelling unit.
Thank you. And then with for the village plan, as part of what is being considered, will we be looking at potential impacts of upzoning on businesses or changes of use on the businesses, because it can certainly change the amount of rent or taxes they pay or things like that. So I'm just wondering if that will be part of it, because I think certainly from the commercial sector's point of view, they would be very interested in that.
Mr. Bull?
Yeah, through you, Mayor. That's a bit of a hard question to answer. I think if we talk about the land use changes initially as part of housing, the housing projects or housing program, it doesn't necessarily change anything on the ground just yet, but of course, if there's a different designation and a different build-out potential, it does affect, it might affect land values. Usually, it doesn't have to direct existing businesses, but it's more of an issue when a redevelopment takes place and all the buildings are replaced with new. That's definitely a change usually for the businesses involved. So that's something that we might need to look further into when we get to actually making changes on the map. But it's not front and center, I think, as part of the housing work, but maybe that's something that could be further looked at during the village area plan. We do have the commercial and retail analysis, and I think it will give us more background and information on how our business is doing, what's the growth potential, so it will give us more insight. But how that translates to the land use changes we're going to consider, I can't comment on that just yet without that analysis being completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bull. Councillor Patterson. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. I'm just wanting to confirm a few things just with respect to the village area timelines. And I guess I would just sort of invite comment from the Community Building and Planning Department just with respect to, it strikes me that given the timeline, there's obviously a bit of a sprint over the next year it's over 2 years, but especially in the next year to run us through the completion of the interim housing needs report and the DCC bylaw, these kinds of pieces. There's quite a lot of work over the next 12 months. I'm just wondering whether or not there's an opportunity to, I guess, beyond, in a more structured way than what would happen with typical council priority setting and council priorities review, is there an opportunity for a more structured review and a touch point for council after that point of completion, essentially at the end of next year in early 2025, to get a sense of where things are at? This is going to be a lot of heavy lifting for the Community Building and Planning Department. And I just recognize that there's going to be a lot of people brought on board. There's going to be a lot of resources brought to bear. So I'm kind of wondering whether or not there's an opportunity to have that kind of look at things at that point.
Mr. Bull.
Through you, Mayor, definitely, I think as part of the updates that we also do as part of the strategic plan projects, probably that will be twice a year then, it will also give us an opportunity to report back on the progress of the housing projects, maybe also on the village area related projects. Yeah, and on the bigger project, the OCP review and the zoning bylaw changes. Yeah, and it will, by that time we know a lot more about next steps, so we can also better inform you about the progress in terms of financial commitments or maybe where changes are needed or could be considered for in the approach that's taken. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks for that. I'm just wanting to expand on this idea of the complete community assessment. There's a community assessment component that's contemplated under the OCP review and is sort of included as a foundational piece for village area planning. And I'm just kind of wondering if you could expand on what the content of that assessment would include.
Mr. Bull? Or am I handing it to somebody else? No, Mr. Bull.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. We don't have a lot of detail on that analysis just yet. We think it's an important one because it ties together, again, land use, but also transportation, access to services. It looks like there's an opportunity to work in collaboration with other municipalities in the region. So we're pursuing that through a grant application. Yeah, the details need to be specified further. I think there will be a report coming forward to you with some more backgrounds on that, which I don't have readily available. Mr. Green?
I was just going to add also, I think the other issue on that we need to understand is the amenity cost charge bylaw, because once we know more details about that amenity cost charge, that may also then dictate or inform what we would like that complete communities assessment to look at, so that we can then use that complete communities assessment to help inform an amenity cost charge, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Worship, and thank you for that. So when we talk about there have been before any direction from the province arrived and before we were challenged by coming up with a way to respond to, you know, the many tasks that were assigned through that, we had the village area planning process on the docket as a priority and as a work plan item. So what I'm hoping to be able to find out here is, or just to confirm that staff have obviously worked and have identified where elements that this is historical item 916 off of the council priority plan. Staff have worked to show where elements of that historical council direction have been integrated into some of the response pieces, and that seems fairly clear. What I'm wanting to confirm is what is then left outstanding. Essentially, we're saying we're going to pick up the more comprehensive village plan, or as proposed here, we're going to pick that process back up in 2026. What elements are sort of the larger scale elements which have been deferred, I guess, is what I'm looking at. And does that relate to what's included in the report on page 7, which is the project elements for village area planning? There are some larger scale elements included here, design elements, transportation and mobility pieces, engagement pieces. Is what's laid out here in this last section, this project elements pieces, are those essentially the deferred pieces, or is that an oversimplification? Broadly, is what's laid out there what we will, in brief, not have the capacity to undertake for the next 2 years?
Mr. Bull?
Yeah, through you, Mayor, that is correct. That's indeed the scope as it stands now. That would be further detailed as the project comes closer. But those are the elements that would not be covered under the housing initiative in the next 2 years. Thank you.
Councillor
That's it
Hanson?
for me for now. Thank you, Your Worship.
I just have a couple of questions. Thank you, everybody, for those. I mean, I think what we're hearing from everybody is obviously still a strong desire to move the village area planning process forward as expeditiously as possible. Appreciate the layout here of how we might create some of the groundwork for that. But certainly, you know, just as I think, just I'm going to share this sort of publicly. I think where I see a lot of that urgency is we hear from our business community that, you know, a lot of the areas, just simple things as simple as our sidewalks needing replacement, and without having, you know, all of our underground infrastructure is there, without knowing the future, just even as simple as how wide are the sidewalks going to be, we can't really replace them because the cost is so high that, and having to move the underground infrastructure for moving poles, like there's some sort of fundamental pieces there that are critical, that are holding up just day to day, you know, and as things deteriorate, that affects the businesses even more than some of these other things. So there's a real urgency. And I think that's what you're hearing around the table here. It's not as simple as we just want to make priorities. Their businesses are actually suffering by this inability, and we can't make those investments until we have it. So I appreciate us having that in there, but I think also just as we think about how we move those touch points that were asked about earlier, I think are super critical, just because I think we need to make sure that if we have opportunities to incrementally look at some of those pieces, we might tackle them. I just want to confirm on number 73 of the attachment 2 in the housing projects prioritized timelines. Is that required? I see it. So there's a green bullseye under update OCP to accommodate SSMU zoning, but there's no actual requirement to do that till the end of 2025. Is that correct? The OCP changes are not actually required.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. That's correct. They are not
2024.
provincially required, but through the discussions we had recommended to make that part of the new housing program introduction, and this is also one of the projects that council had prioritized. Thank you.
Okay, so that would include the sort of the light review of some of those other areas. So that's why it's in that timeline. Okay, thank you for that clarification. And actually, I think the other question I had was answered already. Yep, nope, already answered. So good. Those are all my questions. I'll go back. I might just go to members of the public. If anybody from the public wishes to talk to council on this matter or have any questions, I invite them to raise their hand either online or in person. On this portion of the meeting, which is the not seeing any, although I'll leave the option open to people if anybody changes their mind. Councillor Patterson. And then Councillor Braithwaite, you wanted to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I just wanted to clarify your statement about the village plan and delays that could be encountered in things like what I consider to be court services, which are repairs to the sidewalk. And I think most of our sidewalks, say in Oak Bay Village, it's beyond a repair. I mean, it's a major overhaul. But as I understand all of this, you do the village plan, but I don't think that you can't wait until you finish with that. So yes, you might have some parameters that you would say this is generally where the target should be, but I think that the sidewalks have been kind of under replacement analysis for over a decade, and so if they are replaced so that we create safe sidewalks for all of the community and the public that visit our villages, then if changes come after that because of new development that arises out of some of the provincial housing order, then as part of that new development, they would simply just have to once again replace, and even if the sidewalk has only been repaired for 2 or 3 years, it would be really their cost to replace whatever it is to the state that they find it in. And so I would hope that in undertaking this, it does not further delay replacement of the sidewalks, because it isn't just an appearance factor, it's a safety and mobility factor. So I think that's important.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. We have the recommendation here, which is to adapt, that original motion that we made to kind of include this detailed breakdown.
I'll move receipt.
Moved and seconded. Obviously discuss receipt. All those in favor? Any opposed, unopposed?
And I'll move the staff recommendation.
Moved. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Thank you. Is there any other discussion on? Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. At the appropriate time, I'd propose an amendment to the motion on the floor.
It's always an appropriate time.
Thank you, Your Worship. So then I would propose that the motion as presented be amended and further that staff return the timeline laid out in attachment 3 of the staff report to council in Q1 of 2025 for review and possible revision.
I'll second for discussion.
Sure. Thank you. Just, this is attachment 2 of the report, is that?
Attachment 3 of the staff
Okay.
of the report, Your Worship.
Oh, that
It specifically relates to village area planning timelines.
Okay. So the way I'm reading that, it's just, I think I'm on the same page as you, and I was going to reiterate in slightly different words. This would essentially ask that timeline come back in Q1 of 2025. So that really kind of kicks off in 2026, but it gives us a check-in point to see if there's things that we can advance at that point. Is that the intention?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Thank you. I'm just going to turn to staff to see if there's any thoughts or concerns about that.
Mayor, thank you. No, I think that is something we can look at the time, and by that time we also know a lot more about how much progress we might have made on the housing front, so it's no concerns on my part. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other? You've already motivated, I think, or do you wish to? Any other, is there a discussion on the motion? This is an amendment motion to add that rider, which asks that to be brought back at that time. Or earlier, I'll just say that. Councillor Green, on the motion to amend?
No, I'll be supporting the amended motion. Just a question through you to Mr. Bull, or this may be more a question for engineering, but does that mean that work will continue on upgrading sidewalks and so on in the village centres between now and 2025? I mean, that doesn't mean that nothing happens until 2025 on some of those elements. Thank you.
Sure. I think the answer is no. It does not stop things from happening, but Mr. Robertson, you're here, so if you wish to. Welcome, Mr. Robertson.
Are we live? Okay. Through you, Mayor, we would continue to do repairs for safety and maintain accessibility. There's one particular area where there is a stump right now that we're planning to do work on in Q1 of 2024 to make that area safe. But we would look at other areas, and we'll be doing a walkthrough to look for the repairs to do for this coming year. But we wouldn't be doing any major replacement other than that one area as far as right now, that I know right now.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Appleton?
Well, thank you, Your Worship, and I don't want to beat this one to death, but I appreciate the interest in the amendment, just because I appreciate that staff have always offered the opportunity to revisit all council priorities, and we're kept well apprised of what the status of things is. We have the yearly touch base points and regular touch points to be able to revisit council priorities. I'm interested in this specifically to provide sort of a standalone check-in point, because as Mr. Bull has mentioned, I think much will be better understood in a year's time about the implementation of the plan. And I think it's important that we signal to the community that the village plan we've referenced it many times and have indicated it's a high priority over the course of this term and even in previous term. So we want to be, I think, directive and very pointed in indicating our support for moving that forward. So it's a balance between much not being much to do, and the staff group needing to be nimble on this point. It's almost, I'm trying to sort of indicate council's nimbleness on it as well, that it may very well be that staff will require a governance decision at that point to kind of rebalance these things and revisit once we know more. Thank you.
Perfect. I don't see any other speakers on the amendment, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. So we have an amended motion in front of us. Any other discussion on that prior to my calling the question? Not seeing any. No? Yes? No? Councillor Watson?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mayor. Just a comment to staff for thanking them for having put together a really comprehensive work plan that touches on the things that are required and also the things that are triggered. I am satisfied that at least for the next 12 months there is plenty to keep staff moving forward, and that there is some careful thought being given to what elements of that will contribute to our village area plan. So I'm really pleased with the outcome that's been it looks like the decision we're coming to tonight, and I do support the idea that we get an earlier check-in about where that might leave us with respect to making progress on the village area plans, because that is really very vital to our community. But I am really just want to say thanks for a lot of hard effort to be able to present this to us tonight, and the understanding you already have about what's required. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I too thank staff for looking at this as thoroughly as they have and trying to accelerate what is manageable and hopefully deliverable. Just as far as the village plan goes, too, it hasn't been touched on this, but I think that it's imperative that we have the accessibility committee established as we go through this work, and we didn't specifically talk about that, and I know that it's ancillary to this specifically, but it's going to be very critical as we move forward on all these issues to have that committee functioning.
Thank you. Councillor Green?
And just a quick comment to echo my colleagues' comments about the effort that staff have undertaken on these reports and the work generally. But I really want to be cognizant that our staff, their well-being and their health going forward are priorities also. And if there is any way in which council can support you and improve the working situation, please keep us posted on those issues, because while we have personnel that look at that kind of thing through human resources, it's also important for us to be aware of the pressures that you're under as well. So thank you.
I'm pretty sure after Monday night, they'll just say, let us get out of here a little earlier, and that's the... All right, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you very much. Moving to 4.3, we have the 2022-26 Council Priorities. Ms. Bay, and for those who may be watching and didn't follow a couple of weeks ago, This was on a much larger agenda. We did not resolve it at that point. We felt there was need for more discussion. And so, but we did spend about an hour on it at that time, so this has been gone through once. People have sort of had a chance to make a preliminary comments and pieces, and I appreciate staff have come back here in this special meeting to allow us to talk about some of these priorities in a bit more detail. With that, I just in case people think that, boy, we're skipping over a lot of these things, tonight, this is actually the second time we've had a look at these priorities. And again, this is open for public input, so I'm going to just indicate if anybody wishes to speak online. I think someone in the audience would like to, so I'll make sure I'll give that opportunity. But if you're online and you wish to speak, please raise your hand now. That's with *9 if you're calling in, or with just with the reactions tab within the Zoom app. And timing for that will be, we'll have the presentation, we'll have a chance for council questions, and we'll go to public for opportunities for comment, and then we'll come back to this table for deliberation of options. Welcome, Ms. Bay.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, as was mentioned, there we're down this road. This is not the first touch point, so I just thought I'd provide a little bit of a recap for those who, if not tonight, then at some future point, maybe rewatching the video of this council meeting. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is really to get council direction on priority projects for next year, 2024, as well as some sense of what might come after that in the following 5-year period. So council really began deliberations on this on November 20th, when you had a brief overview of where we're at with the housing projects and the implications of the provincial directions. Then you continued your discussions on November 27th, at which time you had a high-level overview of the same material that's before you today. And then at that time, on the 27th, you did reach a decision on which projects could be considered complete, and that decision is reflected in the report that's before you today. You also at that time confirmed the funding for the housing projects. There was some desire for more information on the 27th on the relationship between the housing projects and the village area plan, and that's what we heard from the planning department just now. So hopefully that has provided some clarity and an ability to focus on the remaining portions of the council priority projects. So if brief recap as to where we're at with respect to capacity, if staff are to continue on with the projects that are currently in progress and those that have been previously assigned, we have capacity for one more project in Parks and Recreation and one more project in Engineering and Public Works. And that is reflected in the attachments before you. So we also note in the report some potential resolutions for next steps. You'll see in the report that there have been some adjustments to attachment 1 since last meeting, and that was really so that we reflected the nature of the discussions that you had the last time around. So you'll see that there's a little bit more information provided on what's included with the active transportation project. There's also hopefully a little bit more clarity on how the Bowker Creek projects connect to each other and what's proposed to be undertaken with that project. And then lastly, out of respect for everybody's eyes, you may notice that we did reformat the attachments a little bit to increase the font size. So hopefully they're a little bit more legible this time. Apologize for the small font last go around. So you should all have copies of that at your stations. And then just a brief comment about next steps. What you decide tonight will feed into the budget process. And once the projects are funded, then we will proceed as directed. So where projects are funded by the Growing Communities Fund, as soon as council provides direction that that is the source of funding for the projects, we consider that to be the go-ahead, because that money then becomes available. And for the other items where we don't currently have budget assigned and are looking for more, then once that money is provided through the budget process, that would then give us the green light to proceed on the timeline that you provide to us. And that would also be the point at which we update the council priorities plan and make that available to the public. So, Your Worship, that just provides a brief overview of where we're at, and staff, not just myself and the CAO, but the directors of the various departments are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Just from my meeting management perspective, some of these sections, like section 3, which is in progress council priority projects, you would like the motion, basically that staff be directed to continue. You'd actually like to have those motions on the floor. Is that how you'd like to do that? So we can walk through those in order. And I may just treat those, some of these, depending on the input of council, as pieces that are essentially fairly straightforward. And if people wish to delve into them, we can do that. I think just in the interest of stepping through it, if council's amenable, we might just go through these sections in order and take any comments or questions, probably more questions at this point. But as I go through, I think what I might do is just a quick run through with everybody here first, and that is, just given that we already had the motion to deem section 1 complete, we're all still fine with that decision, no changes, okay? And then section 2, I think we just had that discussion, which is the mandated pieces, so no additional pieces identified. And so then 3, we're going to have some discussion on that. We did touch a fair bit on that last time, but we'll just go through that. Obviously, I think 4 is also just for confirm. We'll just go through these one by one, I think, at that point. There's all things that we might just want to touch on. So I'm going to start with section 3 as a way of sort of getting through these. And I did make some notes from the meeting last time, but I don't have anything specific from section 3 that people had flagged in terms of the in-progress council priority projects. So are there any questions or things people wish to flag on section 3 at this time? And we're not going to go to motions right now. I'm just going to go through all of them, and then we'll come back to motions at the end, because sometimes they might, one section might touch on another. Councillor Smart?
Thank you. At the last meeting, I had just asked some questions around project number 53 and just wanting to know when the sort of nearest check-in was going to be for that one. So through you, Mayor, staff, if I could just understand again when we would have a touch point with number 53.
Sure. So we have community. This is all the greenhouse gas related pieces, which will include a staff person, which we have approved through grant. But Mr. Bull?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor. That project is underway. We have assigned it to a consultant. A touch point on this, it's a fairly small project. So I think that the planned touch point on this is later in the process when the review has taken place from some of the programs that other municipalities have embarked on, a scan of what other funding opportunities are currently available for homeowners to do this work. And so I think we intend to come back to you with probably a proposed program. So we're using the scope that had been set earlier, quite a while back actually. There was a fair amount of discussion on this topic a couple of years ago as part of the Community Climate Action Working Group recommendations, and we used the discussions and information from that time to set the scope for this. And so that's the next step on that particular project. Thank you.
Continue.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to staff. My question, I guess, particularly is around bringing the governance decision on the zero carbon and energy step codes to the table, because those are programs that already exist that we simply need a governance decision on. And my understanding from staff was when I brought this up in May that it was part of this project. So I didn't need to bring a motion to the table. So I just want to understand when that governance decision can come to the table, or if I do in fact need to bring a motion forward. Thank you.
Mr. Bull?
Yeah, to you, Mayor. I'm just going to look up the our timeline on this project. We were intending to bring it back together with the GHG retrofit program, and we just talked about this timeline the other day. So we think we would bring this back in Q1, probably in February or March. So and that we would bring something forward on that basis. But of course, Council at any moment can also discuss that topic further on your own behalf. But that's where the timing, our intended and planned timing is at. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bull. Anything else, Councillor Smart?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to staff. So just to clarify then, would those actual programs be coming forward to council for decision-making in February or March?
Mr. Bull?
Yeah, through you, Mayor. I would anticipate in this case, because it is a new policy and program, probably a committee of the whole report first for some discussion and direction. However, with probably tentative recommendations from staff and then followed up by a decision at a council meeting. Thank you.
I have Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you,
Then
Mayor.
Appleton.
And through you to staff, on number 47, which is about the getting some input and from the community, Songhees and Esquimalt nations. I know that this is obviously something that's quite important, and it also spreads over 3 years. And I wonder if we have any indication from the nations as to what their capacity is for that consultation, because I would imagine they're being pulled in 13 different directions. And so is this something that we need to even push out, even into 2027 to have it in all 4 years? Or is it something that we might not be able to do anything in 2024 because of their schedule? Or if staff has any idea around that?
I'm going to go to Ms. Williams on that one.
Thank you, Your Worship. And we have reached out to both of the neighboring nations, and there's definitely interest in having this conversation with council, and finding a time to make that conversation happen is something that's in the works. I think we want to leave it in the time frame it's in, simply because of the 5-year lease on the marina, and trying to tie this future conversation to short and long-term opportunities on that site.
So through you, Mayor, so perhaps we might be able to sit down sometime next year, or within the next 6 months or so, that's to start those conversations.
Ms. Williams? I hate leaving nods on the record.
Sorry, the nods don't come across. I appreciate that. Yes, we anticipate we'll probably have an initial meeting, at least with the Songhees Nation in the near future. Esquimalt Nation is, just come out of an election, so they've got a process they need to go through before they're ready to fully engage.
Thank you for that. Anything else? Councillor Appleton?
Well, thank you, Your Worship. Very brief question, just under the Active Transportation Program 2728. Notation here says that there's a report to come forward as part of 2024 budget discussions. Is that still on timeline and on track?
Mr. Robertson?
Yes, through the mayor, we're working on that right now with our consultant. Our expectation is to have that ready for this budget cycle.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to staff on both of those issues, I guess. With respect to the active transportation program, I would like to ensure that the active transportation program does include active transportation that includes pedestrians.
I'm giving it over to Mr. Robertson.
Through the mayor, the report that we're doing for council is based on the report that we brought forward on the revised or updated active transportation plan. I believe it was in July, may have been June. So everything that's contained in there, which is a variety of projects, but not nothing specific as far as there's nothing outside of what was in the scope of that project. There are other analysis that we're doing as far as sidewalks and roads that are in progress right now of condition assessment, and that will drive our program, a different program forward in this coming year and the future.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
Yeah, so just a clarification on that, because the OCP counted, it referred to active transportation as being all forms of transportation, including pedestrian, bicycles, all uses. And so I do have some concern about the change, the shift, and the split in the programs, because I do think the active transportation relates broadly to all of those. But so hopefully somewhere we will reconnect so that when we talk about active transportation, we're really talking about all forms, and some on the road, some on the sidewalks, some perhaps on bike lanes, but that it's comprehensive, because I think in the OCP it did list sidewalks as, in fact, the highest use active transportation in the district. So I just don't want to lose sight of that. I hope that we're going to continue to be able to somehow bring these programs together.
Mr. Robertson, you may not know this, but we have obviously the sidewalk condition assessment and report coming back as well, I believe. Would that precede the report on the active transport? I guess the active transportation is coming back more as a budgetary item at this point. Is that correct?
It's coming forward as a, well, first of all, prioritization of everything that was in there, and very rough estimates to that, and then fitting into a couple of scenarios for accelerating implementation of that.
And the sidewalk master plan?
The sidewalk master plan we've just wrapped that up with our consultant, and we expect to be bringing that back in Q1 of 2024. And the condition assessment, we're midstream with that right now with our consultant, and we may have the report back in Q1. I'm not sure about that, and thereafter we'd be ready to bring that forward, and the two will join together. They'll certainly speak to a lot of the same issues.
Okay. Thank you very much for that clarification. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thanks so much for that clarification. That's helpful. And I guess the one last thing that falls also into active transportation, rightly or wrongly, but that's bus shelters. And so when we talk about the village planning for the number of locations, I would think that then the bus shelters, which we do maintenance, I know the district does maintenance on, are also part of that framework. So just, there's a lot that it encompasses, and I don't want to lose sight of it as it becomes fractured. And one last comment, and that this will come back to number 47, our discussions with Songhees on the future of Spewang, and I guess in my mind, it is perhaps more important for us as a council to come to terms with changes that we learned from the additional reporting that we received this year and the remedial actions that took place to deal with some concerning situations that are at the marina. So I think that really to have an expectation of what First Nations might want to do, it is important that we as a council understand the ramifications and the full reporting on the conditions of the site. So in fact, we have an idea of what this district's responsibilities are and what we might have to do in the shorter term, perhaps even prior to the end of the lease, but certainly also to inform feasibility or possibility, opportunities at the site. But it's really critical to have those pieces, and I don't know where we stand on the final reporting on that, but certainly I would expect also that Songhees development arm is going to expect to have a lot of hard, detailed information on that to even provide input, because it will guide their commentary. Otherwise, it would just be really their heritage aspects to the site, and since some of it is fill land, there wouldn't even be a heritage component to that because it didn't exist before it was brought together for the marina. So I think that those parts are critical to informing this, and we don't have information on that. I expect we will see it as we move into more of the financial plan.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Just because we are going through all of these and there may be some germane questions that come forward, I'm going to just, since nobody's indicated online they wish to speak to us tonight, we have one person here in the audience who may want to go home. If you wish to come forward and speak to address council, please do so. And you can speak to any item on this report. All right. If you could just turn the microphone on, give your name and municipality of residence. You don't have to move it too close to you. It picks up pretty well.
Okay, my name is Pam Woodland. I live in Oak Bay, Newport Avenue. Hello, everybody. So I'm speaking to the priority project of Bowker Creek, which I'm hoping everybody here is already really well aware of, well aligned with, and maybe what I have to say is redundant because I did send a letter in, but I wasn't certain that the send button got tripped. So, not wanting to leave anything to chance, I'm here to put my body in place of my words about wanting to really encourage that Bowker Creek is definitely a priority for the next year going forward. I'm going to spare you my words because I'm hoping that the letter came through, okay? And I think that sort of speaks to it well enough. The good people who are listening they have access to written material as well. So here I am speaking for Bowker Creek and looking forward to hearing that it is indeed on the books for next year. And Merry Christmas, everyone. And thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open that comment to anybody online as well in case there's somebody not showing up on the screen, which would be very odd. But I just turn to staff. I don't think there's anybody else indicating they wish to speak. So with that, I'll come back to this table. We seem to have gone through section 3 pretty thoroughly. I haven't heard anything in the questions. We got clarification, which is all very helpful. But at this point, I'm looking at the resolution wording there as probably remaining unchanged. There's nothing there that people are indicating is coming off. I might just have one question for Mr. Meikle, and that is just the options analysis for a temporary off-leash dog park. I'm curious about where that is in the cycle. Is that work that's well underway, or is it work that's starting in 2024? Because it may be one of those ones where we may be able to free up some time and energy if it's not too far along. Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. We're on the slate, I believe, for the January 22nd council meeting to bring that option analysis forward.
No cost savings whatsoever at this point. So, okay, good. That's helpful. All right, then moving on to section 4. I'm fine to do the resolution if people are willing to do that. We can always come back and revisit if something changes. So yeah, let's just do that. Somebody willing to move, you can probably just say the
Move the staff recommendation.
Why don't we just read it actually, just because if those are at home.
So starting from that staff be directed to continue?
Yes.
I move that staff be directed to continue to advance council priority plans projects number 15, 18, 21, 25/38, 27/28, 33, 42, 45, 47, 52, 53, 54.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. All right. Moving on to section 4, projects that can be considered superseded or merged with other projects. We had a lot of discussion on this at the last meeting for clarification, and I have some notes here. If you don't mind, I'm just going to read very quickly sort of what I heard last meeting, just to see if there's, and I think, so there was no super consensus. There was 2 smaller projects that I think there was some discussion about separating out of some of the bigger emerging. So one of them was the expanded bike parking that was considered part of the active transportation pieces, but I think there may be some willing desire just to keep it as a slightly separate project because there's probably some short-term wins on that one, just to look at that. And then the extending the Bowker Creek walkway, which is keeping that slightly separate from the Bowker Creek naturalization and so forth, because it's again a smaller project, that much smaller than the total naturalization of the creek is certainly. So those are the 2 things I heard in terms of sort of, keeping some small projects and keeping them separate from the larger projects. And then I heard on, they were just, I just want to make sure I have these pieces here. The advanced vision for Bowker Creek, which is the merging of the, with number 37, the naturalization of Bowker Creek. And there's also pieces here that came out of the housing pieces, which is removing the, moving the OCP piece on Cedar Hill Corner, which is because of the housing pieces. But I might suggest that we just adapt that in a way that sort of takes it off the books unless there's a plan brought forward so we can still have it as a plan to indicate our interest in it, but without recognizing that our resources are not capable of independently moving that forward. So those are sort of the things that I heard at the last meeting and wanted to kind of just bring forward as pieces. Not necessarily everybody would agree with all those, but I just want to make sure those are sort of thrown out there because I thought there was some consensus and thought around those pieces. So with that, I'm going to just turn to the body here and go through items that people wish to talk about. So Councillor Smart, Councillor Watson.
I could just ask a question about the contents of the list of items in 4 before we start the discussion, because I am not quite following what happened to some things that were on table 4 the last time we met.
Sure. Ms. Bay, why don't you just give a quick overview of what moved off of this and where they've ended up?
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. From the list that Mayor Murdoch was just referencing, you'll note that the Bowker Creek initiatives moved off this list because there was a fair bit of discussion last time around and about, and maybe a little bit of confusion about how those pieces related and not wanting to see those superseded or merged. So you'll see that we moved those off this list. The others, there wasn't as clear direction from what staff was understanding, so we left it there for further discussion.
The only change on us is really the Bowker naturalization pieces, which got moved. Thank you.
I see my discrepancies include number 30, number 26, and also number 55. Am I missing anything?
So 26 was the Bowker walkway, so I think that's what, but yes, you're right. Number 30 was on section 4, and that was the car share. And the 55 and 61 and 55, which was on there as well, which is again, Bowker Creek, and that was, I guess, that separation and moving. Ms. Bay, perhaps you can just talk to number 30, which was the car share.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Those are now on section 7.
Okay, so Councillor Smart.
Just one quick question. I think I'm not familiar with the content of, through you, Mayor, to staff, the content of 24 survey on street parking and what that would really entail.
So which number is that? 24?
24.
Okay. It's part of the parking study now, I believe, but I'm not trying to remember who was actually in charge. Ms. Bay, sorry, I'll just go to you first. And I'm getting so used to looking over here, I have to turn
Your Worship, I might just be able to provide a little bit of context on it. It was on the long list at one point, and that's why it's here again for Council's consideration, the project long list in the Council Priorities Plan, which means that it wasn't directly directed at that point for immediate completion, but was on there for future contemplation, which is why it's back for Council's consideration. It did initially come up, I think, as part of a staff suggestion for council to consider when you first came on board and started your term, and it's just something that we haven't really received political direction to proceed with at this time. So the thought is that it could be brought up for consideration should council so desire as part of number 71, if it's still something that council wishes to advance, or alternatively council can determine that it's not something that you wish to advance at this point and just take it off that long list.
Thank you, Ms. Bay. Councillor Smart?
Yeah, thank you. That explains it a little bit. I guess not really understanding what the scope of that project would be. Yeah, it would be one I would consider removing from the list, but I'll wait to hear what other people have to say.
I think our opportunity to discuss that would be on section 7, where it's on the long list.
But it hasn't moved yet. It's still on list 4. So we're talking about whether or not what we're going to do with it.
Oh, survey on-street parking, is that the one? Okay, yeah. Yeah, so it's essentially off the list right now. Ms. Bay?
Your worship, if council passes the resolution as written, then it would come off the long list.
Would it come off the long list, or it's still on 7 for us to contemplate, is it not, that list of items?
Your worship, it would be incorporated as part of the project number 71, so it would no longer be a distinct project on the long list.
Yes, fair. I'm going to throw my 2 cents in on this one. All of our parking is going to have to be talked about as part of our new bylaws that are coming from the province, so I think it's probably going to be part of that discussion no matter what. Okay. Councillor Sawyer, anything else? Any other discussions or comments on section 4? So go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
I will make the recommended motion, Your Worship, that staff be directed to remove projects 1, 3, 5, 6, 24, 31, 59, 60, 61 from lists, indicating that these projects will be further considered and/or actioned.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion? I'm going to just make a comment here, and I think one of the ones, the only one I had flagged here was just number 31, which is still on this list, which is expand bike parking. And to include that as just keep that as a separate project. And I say that, I appreciate it's going to be treated as part of the other pieces in the active transport. Maybe it's, if it's going to be in the active transportation plan, that's coming back in Q1. Okay, that's fine. I'm okay with that. Yep, thank you. Councillor Watson?
I have a question, just in pertaining to what our motion would do if it's adopted. And this is just through you, Mayor, to staff. Would this in effect mean, if we pass this motion, that there are no longer project backgrounders? These things kind of just disappear. They're part of the historic record for the municipality, but they are no longer items. Just clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Bay?
That's correct, Your Worship. They would be addressed as noted in the staff notes. So in some cases, they'd be addressed and incorporated and subsumed under the other projects. So in that context, they would still be coming back for further staff input if they are subsumed under another project. If they're not being subsumed, well, really, then there would be no further action on them.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to call the question then. If there's no other comments, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Section 5, the geese. Anybody want to talk about geese?
I'm going to move that staff be directed to remove project number 40 from council priorities plan long list.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing nobody, nobody's talking, nobody's honking. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. We move to section 6. So these are operationalized and completed as department resources allow. I'll take any questions. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
So just to confirm, thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff, just to confirm what, and I apologize for being obtuse, but those lists, those projects which are laid out on this section 6 are projects which staff are proposing to move out of priorities and into operational matters, essentially that they will be integrated into operational work plans and actioned as operational budgets allow. Do I have that correct?
Ms. Bay?
That's correct, Your Worship. And as there would be a council resolution directing this work, as it's been set out here, assuming that council passes the resolutions as written, then staff would still report out on progress on these projects as part of those quarterly council resolution updates from the CAO. So it doesn't get lost in terms of a transparency and accountability perspective from staff to council, but they would no longer be listed in the council priorities plan. The distinction here is that the council priorities plan is truly the priorities. Those are the items that council says rise above all other projects, whereas the council resolutions would be treated more as to be pursued as resources allow. So they'd be second in the order of priority underneath the council priority projects. Having said that, staff would still be seeking direction from council as to, of all the council resolutions that you pass and projects that you ask us to undertake apart from the council priority projects, which among those, let's say there's 100, are there 5 or 10 of those 100 council resolution projects that are particularly important to you? And you could identify those priorities within the council resolution projects when the CAO approaches you on a quarterly basis for a review of those outstanding resolutions. So you still have very much control and oversight over how those are proceeded. They're just not listed in the council priorities plan if you proceed with the resolution as noted here.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Ms. Bay. Any other, Councillor Appleton, anything else?
Yes, Your Worship. Out of all of the elements that are on list number 6 at the moment, I guess we'll see what the proper language of the motion is and test the will of council. But I would like to see project number 32 be moved off of this list, and I guess onto list number 7 for consideration of possible inclusion in the priority plan.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? 32. It may just be, so just for, I just want some clarification of what that would do, because at this point I understand that report is coming back to council. So what does it change if we move it to 7? Mr. Robertson? This is the, just so you know what 32 is, explore options, or is that engineering, or is it engineering? Yes. Explore options to provide free transit passes.
Yes, through you, Mayor, that's something that we would just, as part of our, I guess as the heading says, it's something that we would just operationalize and fit into our schedule, because it's a fairly minor one. It's just one of those things we need to do over the course of a year. So I don't know that, I think we would be able to look after it under number 6. I'm not sure what more information you'd like about it.
Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. There's, I guess, to my mind, there's 2 steps to this. There's the evaluation of options, and then there's the governance piece of actually assigning funds to, purchasing and resourcing the actual passes themselves. And I know that there's been a couple of different ways of planning this in some of our neighbor municipalities. So I can appreciate that if it moves into an operational sphere under this particular motion, that there will be a report coming back, or at some point we'll get that information back. I'm just wanting to make sure that it stays on I would like to see it prioritized, that council indicates that we would like to be acting on that in a fairly timely fashion, and that we're going to have a governance decision point to decide whether or not we're going to expend resources on that. I would like council to discuss that. So I guess I'm just a little uncomfortable with the idea that it moves to the operational sphere without a specific timeline on a governance feedback point.
I'm not sure where I go with that. I guess that's just more of a comment than a question, but that is the process here. Either we can have it as one of the priorities, in which case we should move it to the top of the list, or we can leave it in this list where it'll come back to us sometime in the next year as time and effort sort of allow. Ms. Bay, you wish to add anything else on that?
Your Worship, quite correct that this is a two-phase project. At this point, that the part that's been asked for, the way the project is worded is explore options to provide it. If this was to be implemented, then it would go beyond exploring options to actually proceeding with the funding of it, and that would obviously have budget implications much beyond the zero number that's cited here in this table. And once that report comes forward with the budget implications, then council can provide direction as to whether there's a desire to fund that, and then that could be incorporated through the budget process, either next year or through resolution in subsequent years. It's not known at this point what that budget cost would be, so and staff are not able to estimate that without going through that options analysis first. So it's kind of a next steps piece that can certainly be accommodated once the information is available, should council so direct.
At this point, it comes back as part of the quarterly CEO report as part of our motions. If it moves to 7, then it comes back as part of the priorities and budgeting discussion, I guess, is part of the fall for funding this year. Not the big project, but there's no real funding attached to this one. So this one is one I'm not entirely clear what the change would bring on for. But the motion's yours, Councillor Appleton. Do you want to add anything else?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's the component that specifically says as departmental resources allow. And all the departments are working with a number of different projects. I'm just wanting to ensure that this project doesn't isn't deferred or it's deferred to the minimum amount possible. So departmental resources allow leaves a lot of leeway as to what the actual report back timeline might be, given how busy everybody is. So I'd just like it to be on the priority list such that it was considered as such.
I think, Ms. Williams, do you want to add anything? No? Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to follow up and through to you to Councillor Appleton, by suggesting that we operationalize this at this moment, it really is something, the explore part, writing a report piece of this project is not so time consuming. It's something that we feel we can do as resources are available. But keep in mind that I'll be chatting with you quarterly about all of the things on this operationalized list. And if this is something that council says is a high priority, it'll be the first thing that's taken off of the list when resources are available. If it's turned into a council priority project in section 7, then with limited ability to add to the engineering department, it's going to compete with some pretty heavy-hitting projects in that section. So my recommendation would be to operationalize it at this point, and once we bring back options, depending on which one is chosen, it may become a council priority project.
We have a motion on the floor right now to move it, so
I'll withdraw it, Your Worship. I'll withdraw that motion.
Is the seconder okay with that? Okay, so that's withdrawn. So we haven't had the motion on the floor at this point, correct? So we're just looking at these items in section 6. Is there anything else that people wish to go through these pieces? Oh, yeah, sorry, I've got lots of hands. I'll make a list. No, go to you, Councillor Watson, Green, and then Smart.
Yes, through you, Mayor, please, to Ms. Bay. Just a question. I know you're keeping track of all our thoughts, initiatives, and record keeping here. What happened to number 49, which was on this list the last time we discussed it?
This is the most rustling of paper I've heard in this chamber since we moved to electronic agendas. A lot of it.
Your Worship, I believe it's in section 7.
Yep, it's been moved to section 7.
Thank you.
No worries. Let's get these questions cleared up before we make any motions. I have Councillor Green, then Councillor Smart.
Thank you. I would like to remove item number, sorry, my glasses, 19 from the list. This is already addressed through UWSS and ICBC. It's a public education issue. I don't think it requires intense work on the part of us as a municipality or as a staff. So I believe this can be managed externally, and already is, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Moved and seconded. I think you already motivated. I might just turn to Ms. Bay. What is the impact of that change? This is the design and implement a data collection system to monitor the impact of deer on public safety.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, as noted, we already have a system. It's actually collected by the district, and so we have through our report a problem section on the website. We have the ability for people to indicate if they run into issues, and people also on occasion send me emails. And as you'll note, actually just last week. Earlier this week, man, time goes by. We brought forward a report to council on the next steps on the deer management program, and as attached to that report, you had a summary of deer complaints that we had received this calendar year, and there were only 3. So it hasn't been a significant number of complaints we've got. I think the last time I checked, we had 2 complaints online as well. So not a huge volume. I don't think that there'd be much operational impact of removing it from this list.
I think this is another one of those ones that sort of the nature of these things that whether we remove it or not, it's an operational sort of reality no matter what. So we have a motion to remove it. It's seconded. Do you want any more of the discussion on that? Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, through you. Since I was one of the councillors who actually got this to be a project in the first place, I just wanted to ask, yearly complaints, I noticed the comment, are low at 5. If you're looking at sort of the categorization of complaints that we would get, where does 5 fit? Like what other kinds of things might we get 5 complaints about through the website? I know that you may not know off the top, but do we get hundreds about potholes, thousands? I mean, just order of magnitude sort of commentary is what I'm looking for here. Thank you.
The same order of magnitude as complaints about council, probably. So that is. Ms. Bay.
Your Worship, I'd suggest that certainly 5 complaints is probably one of the smallest categories that we have. We reported out on the number of complaints we got in the different categories when we reported out on the Q2 report earlier this year, and there were some categories that had very high volumes of complaints, and this was certainly one of the smaller levels. So to further categorize something that already only has 5 complaints, I'd suggest that whatever, really much as I did on Monday's report with deer, I provided a fair bit of detail there, which probably gets to some of that same information that you would get if I broke down the deer problems into more further categories.
Thank you. That's all I needed to know.
I'd like to call the question on this matter, just because I don't think for $550 one way or the other, and operationally almost no impact, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Just a clarification though, because, and I appreciate Councillor Green highlighting this, because just as staff have shared the information with us, there are complaints that exceed this number and in other categories. But I think in isolating this the way it is on priorities, it almost then would lead one to believe that we will do a report out specifically on this item to the public. And I think, like Councillor Green, would seek to avoid that, because I just don't think it merits. But I think that if we're leaving this line item on the priorities and not somehow just compiling it with all complaints that we get and having staff report to us and make recommendations based on the full list, which makes sense, I would support removing this so that it's not left on there and leading to expectations of individual reporting.
Very good. Just not seeing any other hands. I'm going to call the question on the motion to remove that. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Don't see. Yeah, we can go to the motion, I think, at this point.
Okay, so I will move that staff be directed to include funding for projects number 11, 20, 23, 29, 32, 39, 41, 43, 44, 48, 50, 58, and 69.
Essentially everything except for the
Yeah.
the number 19.
In the 5-year financial plan, blah, blah, blah.
Okay. Blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
Get that
5-year
in the-
financial
get
plan
that
and
in
that
the
staff
minutes.
advance work on the projects as staff resources are available once funding is approved, and that those projects be removed from the council priorities plan.
Okay, thank you. Moved and seconded, thank you. Is there any further discussion on this? All those in favor? Oh, Councillor Smart, my apologies. Looked
That's
way too
okay.
fast.
At the risk of making this meeting less efficient, I was just going to say, I do have an appetite for removing some of these projects if other people felt the same way around the table. So I just wanted to mention, based on our public questionnaire, and I say remove, but I would almost like to just deprioritize them. And I guess the frustration that I have around, this is not being able to prioritize these things. But the projects that I'm highlighting are project number 20 because it was one of the ones that had the highest public feedback on delaying. Project 58 and project 69. So if anybody had the appetite to take some of these things off the table to make more room, I just wanted to say that I have a willingness to move some of those things.
Doing any removals by resolution, so it may be best if you just move them one at a time and see if there's a seconder for any of them. So why don't you move to remove the first one?
Sure. And I guess I just need to clarify then, so what happens if we remove them from this list? Could I, through you, Mayor, ask staff, what happens if we remove items from this list?
Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. If they're removed, they're no longer actionable by staff. So they can always be brought back in a future year, but they wouldn't be listed in the council priorities plan, either on the long list or the short list.
Go ahead, Councillor Smart, you still have the
Yeah,
floor.
through you, Mayor, to staff. So just to clarify then, am I understand, can you explain with projects 20, 58, and 69, for instance, are those all on the long list or are those on the short list? Could you just clarify?
So they're all, I think, essentially as resources allow. Ms. Bay?
Your Worship, I believe the 20 was on the long list, and the 58 and 69 are resolutions that council, they're on the list because council passed resolutions for us to consider those.
Go ahead, Councillor Smart. If you wish to make a motion, then this is the time to do it.
Yeah, I maybe it's just enough, I guess, I just feel like mentioning the lower priority aspect of them. I don't want to remove them completely, but I just struggle with not being able to give direction priority-wise with this list. So I will leave it, the motion as is.
Okay. I have Councillor Appleton and then Green.
Well, thank you, Worship. And I don't want to belabor this, but just with respect, I do in some ways concur with some of what Councillor Smart has said here, especially with regards to number 58, which was brought forward by resolution, the property maintenance bylaw. And I don't want to put it actually doesn't assign this to community building and planning, but it sure sounds like community building and planning to me, or it sounds like it might land over there. But I'm going to assume that if in fact, and I don't want to put staff on the spot, but I guess I'm asking the question, if in fact this would land with community building and planning, and whether or not that's the most likely place for it to land, and if it does land there, community building and planning is at a -7 project deficit for the next 2 years. So I mean, I don't want to be dismissive of something which was brought forward by resolution, but essentially this is not going to be actioned operationally for 2 years if it's built within building and planning, correct?
Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, I wouldn't see the actual priority project, the development of the maintenance bylaw, being a community building and planning project. It would it would most likely fall to corporate services. However, the implementation of it will entirely be within community building and planning, as that's where bylaw enforcement is.
Councillor Green, and then Braithwaite.
Just for clarity, a question. Is number 11 included in this motion?
11 is, 19 is not.
11 is, 19 is not.
Yeah, 11 is included. The only one on this list not included at this time is number 19.
Just 19 is gone.
Okay, so 11 stays, is that? Okay, thank you.
I don't see any other hands on this. All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. Look forward to those updates on those pieces, and appreciate staff keeping them on their list to move them forward as available. On to section 7, which is projects for possible inclusion, probably the one that's going to cause the most conversation here tonight. So I'm going to maybe I'll just turn to members of council if there's anything that you wish to highlight. I actually had a couple of notes here that if I can find them, I thought they might help guide, again, a little bit of the discussion. Just give me a second here. So yeah, I'm gonna reiterate what I heard at the last meeting in terms of, so there was, in terms of things that people saw on that list that they were interested in moving into the council priorities. And this is by no means that I'm limiting it to this number, but this is just what I heard at the last meeting, and people have had more time to look since then and change their mind. But there was 3 people who identified in that, when I asked people to kind of go through, 3 people who identified number 14, which was the Parks, Rec and Culture Master Plan. There was 2 that spoke to the adding the erosion prevention at McNeil Bay, 2 that spoke to the naturalizing of Boker Creek, and then 1 each for improving solid waste at Elgin, the rental strategy, the comprehensive park management plan for the uplands specifically, and then of course a lot of talk about village area plans. So village area plan, not part of this discussion now. We've dealt with that. So those are just that was my feedback. I went back and looked at my notes. That was what I heard. So if that helps or hurts, I don't really know, but I just thought I'd share that with you in case people's didn't pay attention to what was sort of raised in that long list of things. What I got out of that was there was no cohesive, clear, we're going to choose 1 or 2. There was no like, oh, one's an obvious one. I would suggest that perhaps the Parks and Rec master plan versus the comprehensive management plan for the uplands, we may want to prioritize one of those 2 if those are pieces that we're looking for Parks, Rec and Culture. And then we have probably some of the things like the erosion prevention and naturalizing of Boker Creek as likely pieces that are also sort of at maybe not at odds, but probably have to be prioritized if we want to do one of those. And I think some of the other pieces like the rental strategy, solid waste, obviously are just maybe for further discussion. So there you go. I hope that helps a little tiny bit in the discussion. Councillor Braithwaite, go ahead.
Just to clarify, we're only choosing 1 thing for Parks, Rec and Culture and 1 thing for Public Works, correct?
Well, that's likely all that we can actually manage. I think is probably the reality. I mean, if there's 2 small projects versus 1 bigger project, I think that can be taken into account, and those are questions we can ask here today. Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, that's correct for 2024. You'll note there that in the green text on your sheets that there's two potential resolutions there, one for 2024 and one for 25 to 28. So if it's still a project that's of importance to council and that you wish to see it pursued later in your term or later in the 5-year financial plan, there is the opportunity to place it in that second resolution as opposed to the first.
Thank you. I think for me, if we're looking at which ones are of importance to each person, and I love the fact that we can actually put something on for the future as well, because that really helps. Because I think, as we heard tonight from the speaker, the Boker Creek is quite important. But I would actually put the Parks, Rec and Culture Master Plan prior to the Boker Creek. So I would like to see the Parks, Rec and Culture Master Plan in 2024 and Boker Creek in 2025. And then for...
Can I just ask you to read out numbers? I'm just going to jot down numbers as I go.
let me just find it
Oh,
here.
that was
14. 14 is the master plan.
Yeah.
And then the extent, no, I'm looking for
Or Bowker Creek.
the Bowker Creek, which I think is number 26, is that right?
That's just the walkway.
Oh, that's the walkway.
Is that the?
Where's the other one? 55, thank you, 55. And then the big one for me, I think one of the most important things on this whole list is the erosion at McNeil Bay. So that would be the thing that I think we should be taking care of immediately.
And sorry.
And that is number 34.
34.
Thank you.
Out of there. Thanks.
But I could be swayed.
No, I think it's helpful to go around the table if people have strong feelings about things that we hear from them. It's just, why are we doing this like 2 weeks before Christmas? Like, hey, we have all these wonderful ideas. Let's do 1% of them, just because that's all that we have time and money for. It's like a negative gift giving here, as we have decided what not to give. Councillor Green.
Just a question for clarification. I know that from the last meeting, we merged the housing-related issues 2, 4, 7, and 8. I believe we merged those together. My only concern is updating the zoning bylaw. My question is, will that occur naturally sooner than 2026 through the provincial housing initiatives and the Housing Supply Act? Or do we still have to update the zoning bylaw independently? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Mr. Bull.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Yes, I think the housing changes are going to be more focused, and this is really a more fundamental look at the zoning bylaw and take that vital look at what is working well or what is maybe complex. So yes, it's a separate, different effort down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a follow-up comment then from me. I mean, I would really like to see this stay. It is, 2026, that's the end of our term. And I was hoping that surely we could, this is long overdue. This has been on the books for at least 10 years. And it's never happened. We've never done anything about it. And it's partly why I believe Oak Bay has been slower on housing. I think it's been an obstacle, not an enabling bylaw. So my wish would be to expedite this update and do it sooner than 2026. So that's just my own personal feeling about it. I will leave it to others to talk about it.
Yeah, I think one of the issues we have here is adding anything to the community building and planning priorities. At this point, that was sort of the whole structure of what we have over the next 3 years, right? So almost impossible to add a project to that department at this point, unless it's into 2025, 2026 and beyond.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else you wish to highlight that you might wish to move off of this? We can come back to you if you wish.
To move off the list?
No, to move from this list onto for inclusion in the priorities. I can come back. To you.
Yes, thank you.
I have Councillor Appleton and then Watson.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple of questions, and then I can probably bring a motion here. I don't want to put Mr. Bull in the Community Building and Planning Department on the spot here, but I'm kind of wondering. I was actually surprised that item 4, which is the Secondary Suites Incentives Program, is still actually retained on the list, given everything we've seen with the provincial directives and secondary suites essentially being allowed by right. And I mean, it seems to me that every new unit being built on a residential lot will now, have secondary suite, but it doesn't really fall to the district any longer to incentivize, because people will choose, if they choose to have one, essentially they can have one. This was brought forward in a time when, we felt that there might need to be some incentives or some dispensations made to folks to encourage them to build those dwelling units. I'm not sure that that's really relevant anymore. So maybe Mr. Bull or folks from the department could comment on that. I'm just wondering whether it simplifies actually to have it removed, and maybe the follow-up question to that is if there's more discussion that council needs to make in like a committee of the whole type of environment, then it would be great to be able to do that and have that cleared off of the work plan if we can make life simpler for the department.
Thanks, Councillor Appleton. I'm going to just turn to Ms. Bay first on this one. If we leave everything alone, they stay on a long list, but they're not actioned. Is that the status of the things in section 7? Or do they disappear entirely after this if we don't? Just curious about from a tracking of initiatives perspective. If we just leave 7 untouched, we don't make any changes, these stay on our long list of priorities, but they don't get action unless at a future priority session we move them up into the list of something to do. Is that correct?
Thank you, Your Worship. Some of these are on the short list right now, so if they're removed, then the council can either provide direction just to remove them completely or to leave them on a list for future consideration. Either are opportunities. If they're on the long list and council removes them, then it would disappear completely.
Goal to the primary question there, which is the timing of that or the need for that, especially given some of the provincial incentives that have also been announced.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. This project was retained in this list because it was identified as a council priority project earlier. The original intent, I believe, was to build on the introduction of suites in our zoning bylaw, but then look at what we might do to encourage existing suites to come forward and follow the building permit process. We were somewhat reassured by the provincial program that is actually rolling out next year, thinking that, well, the province trying to facilitate improvements that require a building permit kind of might achieve the same target. That said, we wanted to keep it as this was one of the identified priorities. So, and in that context, it's placed, has not been included in the housing action for the next 2 years, so to say. But it's remaining there as one of the projects that we could take on in that second part of this 5-year plan. But yeah, if council would like to make changes, that is entirely possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. If it doesn't have a large budget allocation, but it does, indicate, potentially high staff, and I appreciate staff's comments about, not removing something that, not too long ago, maybe about a year ago, was, sort of number one, very high on the priority list. So it's kind of interesting to reflect on that. But I'm just wondering, for simplification, whether or not it might actually be easier to get rid of it. So. I am going to make the motion that staff be directed to remove project number 4 from the council priority plan.
I don't see a seconder right now, but I'm not going to throw that away. I think we'll go through this and hear from everybody on these pieces, and I'll come back to that and see if if that makes sense in the more cohesive conversation that we're having on this. You still have the floor, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we'll come back to it, moving to a different subject entirely. I'm just wondering, there's still, I think we're still having some confusion around the Bowker Creek project. There's 26, there's 37, and there's 55. And I'm just, to my mind, 26 and 55 are in fact the same project. Because 26 was... The original was first, but that's the lower number, talking about creating an active transportation corridor. 55, the community, the Bowker Creek, Friends of Bowker Creek and the community brought forward, an idea that created this council resolution under 55, which, as it speaks to in the report, talks about regional greenway creation. So number 55 includes naturalization, but it also includes the greenway and the active transportation corridor. So I think for simplicity, and I would ask staff to comment on this, but in my mind, number 55, which was a community presented vision for Bowker at Bee Creek area, which specifically does involve a walkway and an active transportation corridor, that it might be simpler to just subsume 26 into 55, or the other way around, whichever way you prefer, and consider them together, because section number 37 is naturalization of Bowker Creek, which is the larger initiative speaking to the 100-year blueprint. And certainly many of the large-scale things contemplated under 37 are not within our purview to look at right now, and will be on a quite longer list entirely. But I want to maintain clarity around this Bowker Creek project because I think it's important, the Bowker, the B Street and that walkway piece. So I'm just wondering whether staff could comment as far as like, can we consider 26 and 55 together? Because I would consider that my priority is advancing that project for engineering and public works, and I just wanted to get some feedback on that.
I'm going to go to Mr. Robertson on that one.
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, we consider them one project because we have, well, I guess we could take up all of your parking lot over in Rec Center. But there are lines we have to work within, and so they're all part of that same area that we're going to examine. So looking at each one, all of them together makes sense of being able to say, what could we do to fit all those things in there? So we consider it one project and would certainly look at it that way.
Sorry, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And would you like to continue with discussion, or can I make a motion to this effect?
If you don't mind, I wouldn't mind just going around the table to hear where people are at, and then we can maybe come back to motions. I don't mind coming back to you on that. Anything else you wish to kind of flag?
I'll yield the floor then.
Okay, thank you. We move to Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mayor. And through you, this will probably be a question to Mr. Meikle. I am trying to decide in my own mind whether I think as a Parks and Recs property, number 14 or number 70 should take precedence. And I just wanted to understand a little bit of the history that got to us having item 14, the development of this parks at Rec and Culture master plan. How many years has this idea or this need been discussed in the community? And I guess a subsidiary to that, if we didn't make this our priority, what would happen for the next 2 years in terms of managing and planning for parks and culture activities?
I think that's for you, Mr. Meikle, but I will point out this is a vision for the next 10 to 15 years, and I think when we started this, it was a vision for the next 75 years. Go ahead.
It's a serious question.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. So traditionally, and it's a little hard to piece these two things together. So traditionally, what you would see is that larger scope Parks, Rec and Culture master plan. And most often within those kinds of consultation, engagement, and strategic planning processes, you will see a recommendation come out of that to essentially undertake number 70, to dig a little deeper into the needs at Uplands Park and help us understand a little more intimately and detailed what we need to do to protect that park and to move that park forward. I may have missed on the timing of those two pieces just because of I likely had identified number 70, Comprehensive Park Management Plan first, because there was several project backgrounders focused on Uplands Park and Cattle Point leading into these discussions, and so felt like it was a bit of hesitation to move forward with some of those project backgrounders pertaining to Uplands Park and Cattle Point without a better understanding of the implications in that park as a whole. Traditionally, it likely makes more sense to do the larger scope Parks, Rec and Culture Master Plan first and allow that to speak to that next step into Uplands Park. Again, my assumption and high probability is that would be the recommendation, to take a closer look at that park as a specific management plan for that park specifically. I'm not exactly familiar how long the Parks, Rec and Culture Master Plan has been on the list. It has been some time though. So, yeah. Thank you.
And thank you, just to follow up on that. So am I hearing you say that, in this master plan, there would be timeline and implementation schedule? Do you anticipate that?
Right, Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, yes, that would generally be the case with those. They would provide some timelines and some strategic recommendations as to when and how to move those forward.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Meikle.
Thank you. Anything else? I have Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. And just, I want to backtrack back to the developed secondary suites. And the reason I think that we were trying to, in fact, look at ways to incentivize the already existing suites to come forward and register. I think that that's still critically important, both for safety elements and also so that we better understand the housing we have. But now we have also sort of a side category to this that isn't on here, and perhaps staff can shed some perspectives onto it, and that is short-term rentals, because that landscape is changing quickly. I think that some of the existing suites in Oak Bay are being used as short-term rentals in addition to whole houses. And so that is something that is relatively recent with this new housing plan and what actions the province is going to take. We haven't addressed that specifically in this, so I'd like to have some input from staff on short-term rentals. And for secondary suites, we haven't had much uptake for existing suites, and so would it be incentivized? Would it be inspect? I don't know, but what's the framework for going forward on it?
Mr. Bowl, and two separate pieces there, but sort of linked: suites and short-term rentals.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Through you. For the short-term rentals, the basic provision we do have in our zoning bylaw since the introduction of the secondary suites is that renting out houses shorter than 30 days is a prohibited use. So that acts as a default ban on short-term rentals. The provincial changes are a little bit different. They extended to 90 days. It's not really on our radar in the short run to further look into that because our focus is going to be on housing, of course, and so that's the answer probably on that one. Sorry, I'm blanking on the second part of the question, Mayor.
Just incentives for secondary suites or enforcement.
Yes, that was indeed the focus of the project for. Suggested to maybe take place in 2026, to consider that, to look at probably a combination of trying to provide an incentive to come forward and follow the building permit process, to get a proper building permit for the suite, address any safety issues, and the flip side of a program like that would likely be to consider if there is resources being freed up or made available to do more proactive enforcement. That would be kind of the type of program that you might come out of a project like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask a little follow-up on that, if I may, Councillor Patterson? And that is we just went through a process of looking at Section 6, that projects that can potentially be operationalized. So no particular timeline, but might make sense just as staff see fit. I'm just wondering if maybe both those, number 4 here, which is any kind of secondary suite incentive, and maybe also short-term rental pieces, if those can be sort of thrown into the mix of things that, as staff are going through those bylaw changes and other pieces, if staff see opportunities for some of those, that maybe they can be flagged and brought back to council or operationalized. I don't know if that's a reasonable approach to it, because it does sort of add it to a list of things to do, but it leaves it essentially at the discretion of staff to have that as part of the list. Ms. Williams looks unhappy with my suggestion, so I'm going to go over to her microphone.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just looking at the projects that you have under conversation right now, and I wouldn't see those as something that we would be able to operationalize just because of the amount of staff time they're going to take. So, as resources are available, is typically a smaller project that a person can pick up in a couple of days. This one would be a fairly significant program, a couple of touch points with council, and yeah, so I think we're probably better to leave it here, and the department who would be responsible for it has no capacity for the next 2 years anyway, so you would just see it continuously on that 4-month list.
I hear what you're saying. Anyway, thank you. Councillor Patterson, anything else?
Yeah, the other thing that I might consider removing from this list, although it's extremely important, but I think it's part of a bigger project, and that's number 8. Identify how to prevent or reduce building and infrastructure loss from earthquakes, tsunamis, sea level rise, etc. That, in my mind, should now all be part of our climate mitigation and hazard risk assessment program. And part of that program is mitigation, prepare, respond, and recover. So I see that as broader than this, and so I don't know that this specific action needs to be on here. I would consider removing number 8 from this list if, in fact, that will correspond with the new position that we have appointed, or not new position, but new hire that we have appointed in that category to come forward with the hazard risk assessment that it will be filing with the province and feed into these out of that. But I would see that as being the basic foundation that we would build off of for this and is necessary before we get to this. That's my take on it.
Thank you. Just for my clarification, this is one that has a lead department, but no budget, no timelines, and nothing else attached to it. And I grant you, none of these are actually moving forward at all unless we actually move it from this list into something else. But perhaps, Ms. Bay, you can just touch to that point.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. The reason for the lack of that information is that staff were not entirely clear on what Council's desire was with respect to this project. So without having a sense of what the scope was, we were challenged in developing a budget for it or a staff resourcing component. And maybe if I might, just while I've got the airtime here, I just wanted to identify a correction on the section 7 with respect to the budget pertaining to number 14. The budget for that somehow along the way got slipped down one note. So the budget that's noted for number 17 should actually be applied to number 14. And somehow that got overridden, and the number that should be applicable to number 17, the Elgin Road Solid Waste, is 75,000 of new funding. So that should be 75,000 in green. So apologies for that, Your Worship.
Thanks for that clarification, Ms. B. Okay, can I keep going around the table? I have Councillor Smart has not spoken yet.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just go through my list because I kind of made my list of things I was excited to move forward. So I think, as with a lot of people around the table, I was excited about the Parks and Rec master plan moving forward. And the only, through you, Mayor, to staff, I had one question regarding that, and that was, if we didn't put any more parks projects forward, could we expedite the progress on Carnarvon Park?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, we're in the process. The RFP is just closed, and so we're looking at selecting consultants. I don't think there'd be a whole lot we could do to actually expedite process at this point. It needs the time for proper consultation there, and I think that's the more important piece, in my opinion. Thank you.
Councillor Smart?
Okay, thank you. So next on my list was my priority for engineering would be the Bowker Creek Walkway 26 and 55 combined. I also had on my wish list keeping a couple of the planning department projects on that I know we can't, but I will mention them for the sake of if they interweave. The car share project, like if that happens to interweave with some of the other stuff going on with the provincial initiatives, and of course the parking bylaw review. So I understand we can't move those forward at this time, but just wanted to mention that I feel they're a great priority. With number 8, the emergency planning piece, I just wanted to flag, and I heard Councillor Patterson's comments, and I guess expanding upon that, like in looking at the survey from the public, this was one of their number 2 priorities of support, prepare for climate-related emergencies. So I like the idea of having this as a council priority project where we have regular touch points, but perhaps if there was an opportunity, and through you, Mayor, to staff, is there an opportunity to move this to the emergency manager, coordinator, and actually move it forward as a council priority project this year?
Lots of people looking at each other. I'm going to go to Chief McDonald. Welcome, Chief. It's the first time we've had a chance to speak tonight.
Thanks, Mayor. Through yourself, I think everyone else is happy to see me speak on this one. This is a very broad area, and yes, we do have an emergency program manager who is, a great hire. However, this is just a massive topic as far as what's listed there. One of the challenges is if we're saying if this is related to climate change, because we're talking about seismic events, tsunami, and sea level rise, it causes a lot of confusion for us on how we actually action that and relate it to climate change, especially when you look at seismic events and tsunami related events that don't have a direct relationship to climate. So that's just, take that, but park it aside and kind of go, how are we going to look at dealing with the other aspects that are identified there as far as mitigation for earthquake? Sorry, just put my glasses on here. So with regards to looking at the earthquake, tsunami, and sea level rise, and reducing infrastructure damage. So a lot of that is related to provincial guidance that's governed under the BC Building Code. So we know that's actually under review right now. There's a new building code that's coming out in Q1, Q2 of 2024. So that's ultimately the big driver for the entire province as far as talking about how we deal with seismic protection for buildings. That's new construction. And if we're looking at how we retroactively improve seismic protection for existing building stock, that's a big broad topic as well. Yes, we are doing what's called a community risk assessment right now. We are mid process on that. There will be recommendations on what comes out of it as far as what the identified risks are for the community, as well as some recommendations. I don't know how fulsomely it will come to play as far as actually coming up with infrastructure improvements to reduce damage, but it will identify at least risk for the community. As far as who has ownership of this, I think everyone's kind of a little reluctant to stick their head up and say, or hand up and say that they will take ownership of it. But if council would like to provide direction, by all means. But I'm that's a very evasive, broad answer, but it's a very broad topic to try and speak to.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thank you for that, through you, Mayor. Thank you so much for that clarification. And I think it shows that this project obviously needs to be discussed more and filtered out, and may not exactly focus in on, I guess, looking at what the community is really wanting right now. I think is that climate-related emergencies piece, perhaps. And I think I would just love to see that emergency planning piece come to the council table. And I gather with this new hire, that might just, I guess my question then through you, Mayor, to staff, might be, is this subject going to be coming to the council table, or do we need to bring it here with a project?
Chief McDonald.
Yeah, through the mayor. So project 41, which was prepare for climate, or I think in, so go back, look at that one. And my screen just timed out.
We're absolutely shocked you didn't memorize the name of all of these items on this. Prepare for climate-related emergencies under fire.
Thank you. Thanks, sir. So yes, if you look at in section 6 under project 41, prepare for climate-related emergencies. So to provide some context, preparing for climate-related emergencies is predominantly operational work for the emergency program. But within that, We have a new, under EMCR, our Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, they've come out with a modernized emergency management piece of legislation for the province. And through that, there's ongoing regulations that are being released over the next couple of years. So we're actively in a review process with that. And as a result of that, we know we're going to have to make a bunch of systemic improvements for the emergency program in a broad number of areas. But specifically, we are operationalizing a review of the emergency program bylaw. We are already underway with regards to working with the consultant on our HRVA, which Hazard Risk Vulnerability Assessment, which in modern terms we're calling a community risk assessment. And then once that's done, we will then be updating the emergency response and recovery plan for the district. So we've got a progressive number of things that are in play and which we will be coming back to council with in 24 as we start to get that information and are able to report back. So I think it will be able to inform you and you will be able to provide additional direction and feedback as we move forward with those steps.
Anything else, Councillor?
Thank you. I appreciate the diversion into that topic. I will wrap up. Through you, Mayor, again to staff, I just wanted to clarify with Project 9/16 Village Area Planning, how that relates to the potential motions we're about to make at the table.
Ms. Bay, my read of this is that we've essentially resolved that with the first report that we had, that's the priorities. Is that correct?
Thank you, Worship. That's correct. The one piece that you'll also note in your reports is there's a resolution with respect to the funding component of the Growing Communities Fund allocation that's kind of noted. It's referenced there in the staff notes, but it's also included in the at the front end of your reports, and that's to address the fact that through previous commitments there was an over allocation of the Growing Communities Fund. So we just want to make sure that if council wants to preserve the money in the budget for that village area planning work to happen down the road, the pieces that aren't covered through the housing related initiatives, that there's enough money to indeed provide for that.
Thank you, Ms. Bay. Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Back to staff, just to clarify then, would we then be including 9 and 16 with that first motion to preserve the budget?
Ms. Bay, I think was in terms of the motion, I think it was just talking about under item 4.1, I guess it was 4.2. That motion, is that what you're referring to? That was preserved within that motion?
I guess I wasn't entirely. So have we already preserved that money? Because I guess I just still see this in attachment number 7, and I'm just confused as to whether we have to reconfirm that if we do our advanced motion project under number 7.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification, Ms. Bay. Is that motion still?
Your Worship, we will need the confirmation of the resolution that's in your staff in the reports here from staff in order to confirm that the funding is available for that village area planning work.
But there's no motion to that in this motion.
Your Worship, the motion I'm referring to is in the recommendation where it says, and that 150K of the costs
Right,
anticipated.
Yep, thank you for that. Please continue, Councillor Smart.
Okay, thank you. Then I'm finished. So just to summarize, because I realized I got a little bit off track, what I'm hoping to see for the first motion in advancing projects is 14, 26, and 35 and 36, because they're already included.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back probably to Councillor Green and anybody else who wishes to, didn't feel they got a complete list. And I'm just going to ask a question, and this is to Mr. Robertson, through me to Mr. Robertson. Can you give us any sense of what's happening in McNeil Bay right now in terms of the erosion? Is that an ongoing piece? Do we have a timeline for when that gets to a critical point? I'm just trying to weigh that against other other items on this list.
We don't have, I don't have any up-to-date data on what the erosion is like and what sort of movement we're seeing. I know that just yesterday I was talking with Mr. Rennick about that project, and he just mentioned to me that it continues to erode, and we have some preliminary ideas of what to do, but the next step is we have to actually go to a consultant to get those brought to life in plans. So I don't know what sort of monitoring is being done, but as it was a project dealing with erosion, I will assume that each year it continues to erode that bank further, and so putting it off will create more erosion. I can't quantify tonight how much that would be, what the impact would be. I guess at this point it would be, the vegetation at the bottom of the slope, but nothing up towards road or sidewalk at this point.
Thank you. I can probably just give some context there. My time on council, it's been about 10 feet of upper level of cliff that has fallen down to this point. So it's about a foot a year on average that we seem to be on average, but I'm not sure what the continuing, if that's, so there's no ongoing monitoring of that. Okay, thank you for that. That was really my only question, if there was any sort of quantification. Certainly my priority at this point is 2024, the Parks, Rec and Culture Master Plan. I think we can kickstart that. I also think there's an advantage that, I'll make my case, in that given that we're not doing some of the other consultative work, like the village planning and some of the other sort of more housing related pieces in this year, just because of the nature of our other work that has to be done for the province, I think this might be a good opportunity for us to take advantage of this sort of gap year and get that public consultation going. So that would be my priority for 2024. And then probably fall into 2026 realistically, but 2025, 2026, look at the uplands our planning process. And I also sort of think that the Parks, Rec and Culture Master Plan can go ahead really with community consultation. Well, the uplands one, we could even start some of the First Nations consultation and so forth in preparation, because that's a much longer and probably a bit more detailed and technical review process that might happen concurrently over time. But I do think that the master plan is beneficial, and I think just having that in place would just speed up all the other decisions a lot. On the engineering side of things, I do prioritize the McNeil Bay for 2024. I think we really need to look at erosion, prevention systems as soon as possible. There's a number of options out there for that, but we haven't yet explored them. And I think just getting that into our 2024 work plan and having it out of the way would free us up to do in the schedule for 2025, all of the Bowker Creek work in that corridor. I would love to do them together. I know that they kind of seem very, very diverse in terms of skill sets and everything else. But if I have to choose one over the other, I think I have to go with the cost and land loss mitigation over the transportation corridor in that one little stretch. Not to diminish that importance, but I just think if we're actually looking at this from a decision-making time prioritization, that seems to me that the choice to make. So that's kind of where I'm sitting at with the two departments available and the two priorities that I would throw in there, or I guess four technically. So Councillor Green, I sort of left it when I was talking to you, if you wanted to come back and add anything or to your comments.
I think we've really covered the waterfront. Everyone has really done a really good job. I don't think I have anything to add that would be helpful at this stage. Thank you.
Fair enough. Councillor Watson, anything you wish to come back to? No. Okay. So I think what we have here is you're going to use this for motions. So that's the way to move these forward. And we have advancing, so if you look at the green section, the third paragraph, advancing projects in 2024 can be achieved with the following resolution, that staff be directed to provide funding for projects X, Y, and Z.
I'm wondering if we can do one project at a time, perhaps. That might be better.
Yes.
Because I think we'll have some, yes, I think it'd be better to do one project at a time.
But the point here, I thank you for that. I will do them one at a time. And that the So we'll do them one at a time. Yes, so, yeah, sorry, I'll leave it there. The idea here is that we're doing an additive process. If we don't explicitly add them, then essentially they stay on this long list and they will come back next priorities for consideration, but they won't be moved forward. Go ahead, Councillor.
So, I mean, maybe I'll start off with moving that staff be directed to provide funding for project number 14 in the 5-year financial plan, and once funded, in the 5-year financial plan. And once funded, list that project in the council priority plan for the initiation in 2024.
The Park Rec and Culture Master Plan for those following along at home. Any other discussion on that? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? We're going to try all of them that people want.
And
we'll
then
just have a debate.
I'll try this one. I'll move that staff be directed to provide funding for project number 34, which is the McNeil Bay erosion, in the 5-year financial plan, and once funded, listed in the council priority plan for initiation in 2024.
Is there a seconder? Been seconded. We've talked about it. Is there any additional discussion? Councillor Appleton?
I'll just speak against the motion on the floor, Your Worship. And as you've mentioned, all of these are viable projects, so it's not at the expense of any project not being important. For me, 26/55, the project at Bowker Creek, is the priority for me. So that's not much to say beyond that. I would like to see us prioritize that project for 2024 and have the McNeil project on the docket for 2025.
Thank you. Councillor Smart?
Yeah, I will also be speaking against the motion. I would also like to prioritize the Bowker Creek walkway. I think it's important that we keep expanding pathways, and I just think it would be enjoyed by such a large portion of the population, and it meets a lot of our council priorities.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite. You haven't spoken on this.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I do hear, and I think Councillor Appleton makes a good point that there's so many important things that we could move ahead with. Having to put it down to 2, the McNeil Bay to me, and I think you mentioned, Mayor, that we're losing about 1 foot a year due to erosion on that area. I think that it's important that we do that in 2024. I'd love to move on to the 26 and 55 in 2025, because I do feel that it's really important, and I know that we have a lot of public support around the Bowker Creek, but I feel quite strongly about moving ahead with McNeil for 2024.
In just a second here, but I just also want some clarification, because I think these two projects are quite different in terms of their scope and time scale and so forth. Because my read of this, and maybe Mr. Robertson, you can correct me, because I'm just trying to align this. The McNeil is a engineering design project for options. Bowker Creek is a substantive, probably multi-year project to do that work. Can you just speak to those two pieces? I'm just wondering if there's some mechanism here by which we can put both into our, the 4-year plan and add them into financial plans going forward, given just one is a longer term, one's a shorter term. Or is that read of it correct? I'm not sure. Mr. Robertson?
Yes, through you, Mayor. The McNeil Bay would be 2024 planning, getting the designs done, and then getting those approved, and then moving to construction subject to funding in 2025. And I think there also are some ideas for grants that we may be able to access for that one. And there's probably a lot less public consultation on that than would the other project. The Bowker Creek would be 2024, doing this first level of analysis of looking at all the different factors of the parking, the path, the creek, and lots of public consultation. And then subsequent years would be deciding on depending on direction, would be then doing up full-scale plans, and then subsequent year coming back for construction. I see that sort of a progression with it.
Both substantive projects, just slightly different in the way that they're. Thank you. Sorry for that interruption of the speaking order, but I'll go to Councillor Green and then Watson.
I will support this motion, and the reason I will is that I feel a sense of urgency about McNeil Bay that I don't feel for Bowker Creek, and I'm totally supportive of Bowker Creek and always have been. And I think it's more an evolutionary project. McNeil Bay poses some real threats to us. You will recall the CRD mapping last year or the year before that shows in the event of tsunami or high tides, sea rise, that is a very vulnerable area, and it will affect and impact through the municipality down as far as Oak Bay Marina. That's where the other end of the impact ends. It will affect all of the homes in and around the pathway, which is quite extensive. So I do feel this is worthy of support because I feel it has a greater environmental urgency at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Watson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I just wanted to explain why I will also be supporting the motion. Although I really wish we could have both of those projects as priorities in 2024. If I have to pick one, it will be the erosion prevention on McNeil Bay for a couple of reasons. One, I think it has been in our mind for a while. And a portion of the Bowker Creek project is really an idea, a wonderful idea that has been brought to our attention by the Friends of Bowker Creek and the community more recently. And I think if I'm even just using those interests to prioritize projects, that is something I'm looking at. I also feel that this is one of these significant infrastructure things that, just like our infrastructure funding for wastewater and sewer, we need to get a grip on and we need to address. And so I think it's reasonable to make this a priority in 2024, as Mr. Robinson has just explained. The work gets done in 2024, and then we look about how we finance it, and then we have the freedom to do the detailed work that engages the community in an excited way in 2025. So, if I have to, I'd like to have both, but I will be voting in support of the motion for the McNeil Bay.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, Mayor. I also support the McNeil Bay. I think it's a duty of council. It's an identified area of erosion, and so I think we have a duty of care and stewardship to act upon it. I think it's also a more achievable project for the engineering department to accomplish to the satisfaction of the community and give us a longer term plan. So I see that as being doable and something that is a duty. I really am very supportive of the Bowker Creek plan. I understand that, and I do keep in mind we also had a collapse of the Creekway that had to have an emergency remediation done on it and was covered by insurance. But so erosion. We can have large-scale erosion and we can have smaller-scale erosion. And so I know there's an importance to the creek, but for me, the reason to not go with Bowker Creek just yet is because we don't have that feasibility report on the emergency safety buildings that needs to be done and how that site will be used. And Bowker Creek is actually part of a creek system, so it isn't just that portion at B Street. It's the entire creek, and so I think Bowker Creek will come up in more of the discussions, hopefully sooner rather than later, but it will also help us frame where we go with that system. But it is appreciated by lots of people, and I walk it almost on a daily basis, so I do know that, and I keep in mind that there has been erosion on the Creekway too, and so we have to be mindful. But I support McNeil Bay.
Any other discussion on this matter before I call the question? I don't see any. I'll call the question. All those in favor and those opposed. I have Councillor Smart and Appleton opposed. Just for my clarification of next steps, I think we've agreed to cap us at the 2 projects for next year, but we're going through this process again in I guess, and priorities update at one point in the late spring, just to get an update on where things are at, correct? This list comes back, and then our priorities setting session happens again in the fall. Is that the correct timelines? And so consideration of, again, adding funding and prioritization of any other projects. And given the conversation here, it'll probably be Bowker, but things change. Is that correct? Is that's the next opportunity for us to set the priority on that?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, so the priorities are reviewed on an annual basis. The Q2 review is just that. It's just a for information status report at that time. But there will be a similar process undertaken next year, at which time Council can reconsider priorities.
Yep, go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
But we are still able to tonight move forward with another one of these recommendations for 2025. Is that not correct?
Yeah, so the second part of that resolution is to add that into the 5-year financial plan. Is that correct?
Thank you, Your Worship. There's two potential approaches here. Actually, there's three. So of the projects that are listed in Section 7, we're looking for Council direction to do one of three things. One is to fund it in 2024 and to have Council or staff initiate it in 2024. The second option is to have it in the Council priority plan for initiation later in the term. So 25 through 28 is the timeframe we're now looking at. And then thirdly, the projects that aren't captured on either of those two lists could either be removed from the Council priority plan entirely, or could be left on the long list for review at any time really in Council's term or subsequently.
So thank you. So I'm just going to, just for clarification, I'm going to essentially treat that first paragraph as concluded. So we have sort of the two projects, one for engineering, one for Parks and Rec. So moving on to the second one, I think there's a will here to move. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Just to clarify, do we need to formally move forward 35 and 36, or does staff need us to do that procedurally?
35 and 36. I'm sorry. Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah, the note there is that number 35 and 36 will proceed as resourcing provided with new staff approval, has already happened. Yeah, so no motion required. So I'm going to turn to Wisdom.
Yeah, so I mean, going on what Councillor Appleton had suggested, which is putting number 26 and number 55 as they relate to Bowker Creek together, I think we probably need a motion to put those two together, do we?
No, you can just, my suggestion would just be to read it aloud, that staff be directed to provide funding for projects 26 and 55.
Okay, then I will move that staff be directed to provide funding for projects number 26 and 55 in the 5-year financial plan, and once funded, list those projects in the Council priority plan for initiation in 2025 or beyond.
Moved and seconded. Councillor Patterson. Oh, okay, sorry. I'm going to second her faster than you were, so that's all. Councillor Braithwaite, I think we've talked about this one and it seems to have broad support. Is there any discussion? Not seeing any. Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed.
And then I'll also move that staff be directed to provide funding for project number 70 in the 5-year financial, which is Uplands Park Master Plan, in the 5-year financial plan, and once funded, list that project in the Council priority plan for the initiation in 2025.
Or beyond, I think is the word. Yeah, I think so. Moved and seconded. And I just want to make sure, I think, Mr. Meikle, the or beyond covers it, because if that master planning isn't complete in 2024, then that would be in and beyond, but it would get added into that time frame in the 5-year financial plan based on your estimations of when that would be ready. Is that correct?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, yes, that would be correct.
Okay. Thank you for that. Is there any, I had a mover, and I saw a seconder, I think, on the motion. Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on that? Councillor Patterson.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. And just for clarification, because of sensitivity around the Uplands Park Kettle Point areas, is consultation with First Nations contemplated as part of this?
Mr. Meikle, I know the answer is yes, but I'm going to turn to you to get the official answer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, yes, that certainly is contemplated and
Very good.
essential.
Very good. Any other discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
And then I will move that $150,000 of the costs anticipated to complete projects.
Can I just, before we get to the, that portion of it? Thank you, but I know it's good, but there's just, is there any, we talked a little bit about people removing things from this list. There's nothing else being actioned here unless we go through a priorities piece, but is there anything if you want to just take off this list completely at this point? We're okay with things as they are, okay. Then I will turn to, yes, you're welcome to move.
I'll move that $150,000 of the cost anticipated to complete projects related to provincially triggered and required housing initiatives be funded from unallocated accumulated surplus rather than growing community funds to address over-allocation of the growing community funds resulting from previous council directions.
Moved and seconded. Any direction, any discussion on that? Seeing any, all those in favor? Any opposed, none opposed? Do we want the second part of that motion, that proposed adjustments to the community priorities plan as directed by council be provided for in the 5-year draft financial plan, or are the individual motions that we've done sufficient at this point? Oh, just in the main report, there's a second part of that, just says proposed adjustments be moved forward. Would you like to see that as sort of a summary of the discussion here today? We've had multiple motions that have addressed the individuals.
Your Worship, what you've provided to date will be sufficient. I will just note that we do need the council priority themes also affirmed, as noted in the council or in the staff report. And secondly, just a note that it would be helpful to receive clarity from council on the projects in section 7 that are not to be completed in 2024 or 25 and beyond. What council's desire is for those is that to leave those in the council priority plan on the long list, then to transfer them there. If so, a council resolution to that effect would be appreciated.
A motion would be essentially that staff be directed to include the remaining projects in section 7 to a long list.
I'll make that motion.
Moved and seconded. It's the opposite of me asking if anything wants things taken off. Did you want to speak to it, Councillor Smart?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor, to staff, I just wanted to clarify then, are these projects then not, are some of these projects I feel like were on our, 5-year plan and funded, and is this motion now, in a sense, not having them? Are we sort of de-escalating the rest of the projects on here? And if so, I might appreciate a discussion to go through them more thoroughly. Thank you for the clarification.
Sure, no problem. Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. If they're on the long list, then they would be brought back for council's consideration next year as to whether you wish to elevate them for completion within the subsequent years. For now, they would be relegated to the long list and not have a particular year assigned to them, and without a specific budget assigned to them either. So what would happen is through the 5-year financial planning process, the money that would be assigned to those would go back into essentially the council priorities funding pot and help fund the projects that you've selected tonight, thereby reducing the cost burden of the overall project package. And then council could consider them again in subsequent years.
Thank you. I always like to point out that the decisions we make here tonight are not the final decisions, because at the end of the day, we're going to look at a budget, and we'll be looking at the cost of all of these in the context of that budget. And at that point, we have to make the final, appropriation of funds, and that's really where the rubber hits the road, because sometimes there are financial realities that trump some of the other pieces as well. We're usually pretty good, given the process that's underway here, that we have funds allocated. That doesn't impact, say, a tax lift, but sometimes we just want to, there may be some things that come up between now and then. I just want to point out, this is not the final point of this, that nothing is real until it's in the budget and that budget is passed. Councillor Smart.
I would like to move motions to put more of these onto the 2025 and beyond list. Would you like me to do that individually or as a sum of projects?
There's nothing we haven't passed a motion at this point. No, I just, Ms. Bay had asked that the staff be directed to remove projects or any projects, but she asked for in the reverse of just approving these to be carried forward. Did I call the question on that? I can't remember. No, we didn't get that motion on the floor. Absolutely fine if you wish to add some other things into the carry forward list. Again, being cognizant of the fact that these are still, even in years 3 and 4, are not probably the community building and planning departments.
Yeah, no, and I can understand that. I guess I feel like this is such valuable information, even looking ahead to see where the projects are lying, like as a best guess for 26, 27, 28, and I don't see a reason to lose that information at this point, and just put them on a long list when we already have them, a level of consideration towards them. So the idea of putting all of the rest of the projects on the long list does not, I guess, sit well with me.
So the only issue is just, again, subject to the budgeting process, the 5-year financial plan. It allocates funds essentially in our 5-year financial plan according to that. So it does take some of the, like generally speaking, when we're looking at these things, if there's each year, we'll revisit the long-term planning through our priorities. And then the budgeting piece, it's totally doable. I just want to make sure that we're also just cognizant of the fact that we go through this process each year, and those priorities are subject to change at each point. So there's less value in some senses looking ahead. But I think if you wish to say, highlight a couple of these that you want to add to the top of the priorities list, I'm just also going to say that if people don't support that, it's not that they don't support the projects, it's just that they may not feel comfortable about allocating priorities for future years at this point outside of the ones already discussed. But I'll leave it to you. If there's things that you wish to bring forward, Councillor Smart, please do so now.
Thank you. I'd like to put forward a motion to advance projects in 2025 that can be achieved with the following resolution. The staff be directed to provide funding for projects 17 and 30 in the 5-year financial plan. And once funded.
Sorry, can you give the numbers again?
17 and 30.
Okay. Give everybody a chance to go there. So it's moved. Is there a seconder for adding those? 2025 and beyond? Yes, I'm happy. Why don't we just do them one at a time? So I'll take 17 first. So the motion is to add, identify options for improving solid waste management at Elgin Road. Is there a seconder for that? Not seeing any. Go ahead, Councillor Smart, and I'll move, that we'll tackle number 30, which is the encourage car share programs. Second. Councillor Smart, let's let you motivate a little bit for that.
Yeah, I see this piece, which actually staff was going to make operational and was going to weave into the next 5-year plan. We specifically took it out just for the governance piece so that we could keep track of it, but not to deprioritize it. And I feel it's with what we're going to be looking at with increased density and wanting alternative forms of transportation, that this is a particularly important piece not to lose track of.
Councillor Appleton, you want to add?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Yeah, I'm in support of this, and I've contemplated a similar resolution. I think, again, this is for priority of 2025 and beyond, and I realize that it does entrain community building and planning, but I'm definitely hopeful that, as we do some of our OCP-related work and some of our work to analyze, the issue of parking and transportation will come up numerous times through the OCP review, and deciding how, and in terms of analyzing transit corridors for which types of single family multi-unit zoning will be applicable. So I'm just going to see this as kind of weaving in with that. I'm hopeful that it's not a giant standalone project of its own, but just something that might sort of weave itself organically into staff's work with multi-unit analysis, I guess. So I'm comfortable with this in 2025.
Or beyond. I emphasize that one. I think definitely for community building and planning, it's going to be in the or beyond category. Councillor Braithwaite?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see this go ahead, but I honestly, I feel pretty strongly about leaving the things on the long list and dealing with that in our strategic priorities coming up, and allocating it into the future like this over and above what we already have, and especially because of the department that it's got to do with, I sadly can't support the motion.
Any other discussion on the motion? Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I can't support the motion either. Well, I mean, it's a great plan and does form part of transportation overall. I understand that, but I think that the Building and Planning Department are going to be pretty over capacity for the next while. And I also think that this is a very preliminary look at things, and I think we've narrowed it down to really try to focus on not only important but maybe achievable. And I think it's important to stay with that, because if we then just keep loading up, it becomes non-achievable. And I think one of our goals should be to be realistic about what we're doing, and knowing that even the list that we are putting forward, once we get to the financial plan and hopefully some of the bigger items, the bigger capital projects that I am hoping to see at least being initiated on that, I think that we would just have to curtail it further. So I support it in theory, but I can't support it going forward at this time, so that it's actually slotted. I think we need a little more wiggle room right now.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question related to the motion, just because I'm curious. I read that and I saw it as, it's $0 with medium impact on staff, so I kind of took it off the list on that front. But I'm also just curious through me to Mr. Bull. This seems like one of those pieces as we're looking at the 2025 larger OCP process, that the question of transportation demand management and parking and these sort of aspects would come into the OCP process. And I'm just wondering, should it be a separate? I mean, it is a little bit separate because it's quite specialized in terms of allocating parking spots and so forth for car share. But I would think it would have to tie into the longer vision for density and transportation management. But I don't know. Is it something that would fit naturally within an OCP discussion, or should it, in your mind, be kept as a separate project?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, it's a bit of a more hands-on practical topic. The way we discussed it earlier this year, the staff report had a couple of options around facilitating this as part of new development, and that's much more likely to be, I think it's listed there, streets and traffic bylaw changes probably. There might be some relation to the business license bylaw. So not so much OCP, it could be freestanding. We have suggested, I think, is it listed here at all? The other match would be with the parking bylaw review, because it's part of transportation demand management, and parking is one leg of that. That's how it could be approached as well. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to call the question then on the motion. So all of those in favor of this amendment, and those opposed? I have Councillor Patterson, Braithwaite, Watson, and Green opposed. That fails. Any other? You just listed two, Councillor Smart. Was there anything else you wish to bring forward? Actually, I'm going to need a motion to extend the meeting by 20 minutes, and I'm not going to go beyond that.
I'll make that motion.
Moved and seconded. Oh, yeah, it is 9 o'clock. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. All right, let's resolve our business. Councillor Smart?
Thank you. I would like, under the understanding that this is advancing projects that will be completed within our term, so we're looking 25 to 28, 2025 to 2028, I would also like to make a motion to consider.
Just let her speak.
Sorry. Within our term and 1 year beyond. My point is that this is long-term, and so I would like to put forward a motion that staff be directed to provide funding for Project 71, the parking bylaw review, in the 5-year financial plan, and once funded, list that project in the council priority plan for initiation in 2025 and beyond. I can't conceive of us not having a parking bylaw review, as it is already part of a lot of the provincial directives, and I think having this comprehensive subject as a council priority project is really important going forward.
Sure. Is there a seconder? Has it been seconded? You've motivated already. Just to add anything else?
Yeah, I guess I do see this as a really key piece. Parking is one of the biggest issues in our community, and we're doing so many different projects with regards to housing and transportation, and I think it's really important that, and understandably, this is not going to be happening in 2025. This is probably going to be happening in 2027, but I think it's really important not to lose track of how important this piece will be to have those conversations in our community as a wholesome conversation around parking and housing.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. Councillor Watson, and then Patterson, and then Braithwaite.
Thank you. I will not be supporting the motion for the same reason that we didn't support the last motion. I think all of these are going to come back to us early when we're going through this process next year. And we'll have a better sense even then of how our work to address the new legislation is going and where this fits into that. So I don't see any advantage to taking additional items off this list other than the ones we have already identified in the motion we made for funding, because it ties our hands to things when we don't really have a full picture. So yes, I do think this work will need to be done. When it can be done is still a question I think we're going to need to evaluate at some point. So yes, I understand that we will need to take a deep dive into this issue, but I'm not so sure that we're really furthering any, council progress on this by pigeonholing it in the way this motion would do. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Any other discussion on Councillor Patterson and Braithwaite?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. And certainly I realize and appreciate Councillor Smart's comments on this. It is integral to what we're doing. But I did note that on it says that any immediate, because the province has signaled that parking will be addressed through further legislative changes, any immediate updates to the current bylaw is addressed through number 81 in section 1. And so I see, with that knowledge that it's going to be at least partially addressed through that, then I would wait for that work to be done so that it will help inform where we go beyond that. But obviously there's going to be some instructions to comply with the legislation, and I think we have to respond to that first, and that's what staff has addressed. So I can't support the motion being put forward now.
Councillor Braithwaite?
I would concur with Councillor Watson and Patterson.
Thank you, Councillor Green.
Yes, and I really appreciate Councillor Smart's concern about parking, and it is an ongoing issue, certainly in the village areas. But I agree with my colleagues about the fact that we don't have enough information yet about how this provincial legislation is going to roll out and how it rolls out and impacts parking generally. Is not known to us at this point. I also believe that transportation has to be a comprehensive plan. The elements have to be planned together because they interrelate, they're interdependent, and it's got to be done that way. If we pull pieces out and make decisions that might impact other pieces of the plan, it's a problem. So I won't support it at this time, but I appreciate the concern.
Thank you, Councillor Smart.
Thanks. I do appreciate everybody's points, and I guess how I see this project in enhancing the work that's happening with the provincial housing directives is actually providing the funding in which to have those community conversations. So we're actually not just doing the tiny little bits that the province is directing, but it allows for that broader community conversation. And so I guess I saw it as a piece that allows for that necessary public consultation and community consultation piece, and that looks at it not, as discussed, not just about parking, but about how parking relates to transportation and housing.
Councillor Appleton, did you want to add something? No?
I just to thank you, Your Worship, just to confirm, in support of Councillor Smart, prioritizing this and moving this forward in this way, in my view, seeks to recognize that, there's been several decades of community planning decisions that are focused around parking. And the nature of our communities is, in a lot of cases, is guided by parking. So I think it underscores how we need to modernize and think differently about parking if we're really going to achieve the goals of a sustainable community.
Thank you to everybody who spoke on this one. I'll keep my comments brief, but it's interesting because I hear the same arguments on both sides of this thing, which is that it's super important, super integral to our housing discussion, super integral to the future of our community. One half is arguing, part of the thing is arguing, well, that makes it important enough to add it in, and I think the other half is saying it's so important that we want to make sure it's part of our housing discussion as part of the OCP and other pieces. So I don't actually think it's kind of interesting. I'm not going to support the motion because I do think, we really need this year to understand what is going to be directed at us and what those contexts are, and it may or may not change in value or both monetary time or value to the community, depending on what comes through this process. So at this point, not supporting it, but I think we're all coming at this from the same place, recognizing how incredibly important it's going to be for the success of our housing and our community going forward. So I'm going to call the question on the motion. All those in favor? This is the motion to, just making sure we're clear. Motion to add this to the 5-year financial plan. Thank you. And those opposed? I have Councillor Patterson, Braithwaite, Murdoch, Watson, and Green opposed. That motion is defeated. Is there anything else anybody wishes to add? Okay. So there is one, I think, is it just the section in number 8 that we have for motions?
Your Worship, I don't believe we have a motion yet on all the other projects in Section 7 being relegated to the long list, so that they do in fact come back for consideration in future years.
I'll make that motion. That the remaining the remaining items on list number 7 come back to council or stay on the long list for the future council strategic priorities.
Second.
Moved and second. That motion was not written down anywhere, correct? That's just something we're making up on the fly. Okay, just making sure I'm not missing something. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Now we move to section 8, which is really just a chance, excuse me, let me get there. These are basically projects to possibly proceed to grant funds have not been otherwise fully allocated, and so this is really if anybody wants to pull things off at this time, or if anybody wants to move any of these up. We did have a chance to talk about this at the last meeting, but I just want to give people a chance. If there's anything here that people wish to see moved forward. I didn't have notes on anybody listing anything at the last meeting, but this doesn't give people the chance here to make those changes. If there is anything people want to say no more consideration, and or yes for consideration. I think we've already gone through the yes piece of it, so I don't think that option is going to be there. But so if anybody wants to strike anything off this list, otherwise I think these stay essentially on the long list if grants are available. Is that how am I reading this? I'm getting a yes. I'm getting a head nod and a head shake at the same time, so I'm going to go get a verbal answer on this one.
Your Worship, these were ones that were identified by council as potential uses or potential projects that the Growing Communities funding could be used for. Council has since committed all of that Growing Communities fund, and until today, more than more than what was in the Growing Communities fund allocation to that. So there's really two options for the projects here, 62 through 66 in Section 8, and that would be either for us not to advance them further or to have us advance them through the budget process. And in that case, they would be funded from taxation, because at this point, the Growing Communities Fund is not a available source. So there might be future grant programs available for them, but at this point, we haven't been able to identify such potential.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. If the resolution that says that projects, that say all these projects not be further advanced at this time, do they still stay on any kind of list? Because I'm just contemplating the idea that a year into this, we may not have spent all the Growing Community funds on our other piece, and we may have some of those funds made available again. So I just want to make sure they're not lost. Is that first resolution that's there, lose them, or does it just essentially park them until next fall?
Your Worship, that is a third option. There is a couple of these that staff may bring back through the budget process, as noted in the staff notes section as well. So there, where that's noted, then there will be another opportunity to consider these through the budget process.
So I'm going on a limb here, and I'm thinking that these are all sort of, we deem them to be worthy projects. We have not prioritized them in any sense at this point. We thought we could fund all of them, or very close to all of them, with the Growing Community funds. And I don't want to spend the next 11 minutes we have in this meeting trying to prioritize those. So I think probably a resolution, and I'll turn to staff for wording, but basically that these be brought back for the next priority session for consideration in the budget. Just leave it like, you know, so they're carried forward, but they're not attached to any project at this time. So they're similar to the leftover items on number 7. Ms. Bay, can I get some guidance from you on an appropriate approach to that?
Your Worship, certainly a resolution to the effect that these projects be added to the long list is one possibility. And then there's another possibility for it to be addressed through the budget process. As noted here, staff may be bringing some of these projects forward for council consideration through the budget process, and then whatever is not captured through that process then would still be on the long list for your consideration next year.
Okay, so I think that's a good way of going. Councillor Appleton?
So moved, Your Worship, that projects 62 through 66 be moved to the council priorities long list.
Second.
Sorry, was council priorities long list or to the budget, alternate process for the budget?
Or the 5-year financial planning process, as noted, is a
Or
possibility.
5-year financial planning process, because I think you're saying there may be some other sources of revenue that are possible for some of these projects in the spring.
Okay, revision, Your Worship, then I would say move this project 62 through 66, be moved into the alternative
5-year financial plan.
Alternative
Options for within the
options.
5-year financial planning process.
as stated, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded, thank you. Any discussion on that? I think that's the appropriate place to have the conversation. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
Can I move adjournment?
Not yet. Yes, Ms. Blue.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Oh,
Would you
priority
mind receiving the staff report for proper
We did
record keeping?
receive that at the very beginning. No, no, we didn't. We did it for the other item. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? But I think we also need to reaffirm the priorities. Okay. So moved.
Move that the 2022-2026 council priority themes as referenced in the December 14th, 2023 report from the Director of Strategic Initiatives be reaffirmed, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on those? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Now we can have adjournment. Oh, sorry, Councillor Watson. My apologies.
Not a problem. Just before we adjourn, I did want to say that I think that the process we've used to do this has worked very well. I know when we met in November, it seemed like, oh my goodness, how are we going to get through this? But we did, and I want to thank the mayor for his very able chairing. It was a lot of material to take in, to understand, a lot of work from staff to organize it for us so that we could get to these decisions. And I think we have done an excellent job collectively of getting where we needed to be in just 2 meetings. So I just wanted to sort of give a round of applause to everybody.
I like the positive attitude. It always feels like, it feels sad to me that we can't move more of these wonderful ideas forward. So it's always my feeling at the end of these, but I appreciate the positivity, Councillor Watson. And I agree that I certainly appreciate the thoughtful approach everybody has taken. Clearly, everybody came very well prepared. Did I have a motion to adjourn? Yes. Moved, seconded. Just going to turn to staff before I call the question. Am I missing anything else on this meeting? No. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Thank you for the extra 13 minutes, everyone. And Merry Christmas. Yes. Hope you all have a wonderful time with family.